I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Arab American Educational Foundation Center for Arab Studies at the University of Houston, and on behalf of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and on behalf of the Jerusalem Fund, as well as the Arab American Educational Foundation Chair in Arab Studies at Rice University. The idea for organizing this webinar teach-in originated with Professor Ussama Makdisi. We were having a conversation in light of the recent situation in the midst of all the terrible, horrendous coverage that does not correspond to the realities on the ground. The need for a teach-in became very evident. And initially, the idea was to provide a space in universities in the US. But then we thought actually what is really lacking is the voices of organizers on the ground and mobilizers across Palestine, because this is a unique moment in which people are mobilizing in every part of Palestine and every part of the Palestinian shatat abroad. So it's a very special opportunity to welcome all the people joining us on this webinar. We have speakers from Gaza, we have speakers from Al-Quds, Jerusalem, we have speakers from the West Bank, and we have speakers from the Palestinian shatat. We're going to give priority first to our speakers from Gaza because they have now a shortage of electricity. Electricity is down, the bombing is really strong, and we don't know how long they'll be able to be with us. You know, at any moment their phones could lose connection. So we're going to start with Hamdi Shaqqura, who will tell us about the human rights situation and what's going on in Gaza on the ground. Hamdi is the Deputy Director for Program Affairs at the Palestinian Center for Human Rights in Gaza. PCHR works to create and develop democratic institutions and to an active civil society while promoting democratic culture within Palestinian society. But they also provide pro bono legal services to a range of victims of human rights violations in Palestine, and they work really hard on representation of women and women's organizations. They also prepare cases against Israeli war criminals for persecution in international fora. So it's a great honor to have you with us, Hamdi, and please start by giving us a background on what's going on in Gaza today as seen on the ground.
Well, thank you so much for organizing this webinar. As we commemorate the 73rd anniversary of Nakba, what we see in Gaza, Muslim, and indeed in the entire occupied territory is a mere manifestation of the failure of the international community to take action. For more than 7 decades, the international community has failed to take effective measures, actions to uphold international law, to uphold the rule of law in the case of Palestine, and in this case, prosecute war criminals and those suspected of committing war crimes against Palestinian civilians. And of course, the current situation of Gaza is the clearest and the rudest example of what I say. For the 7th day now, Gaza is under fire, under harsh attack, offensive by Israeli forces, Israeli occupation, where the Air Force, gunboats, artillery, all together, just all the time, every single minute, we hear bombing, attacks. Last night, and indeed the last 24 hours, been the harshest. For me in person, the whole, it's like an earthquake as they deployed their forces in populated, densely populated areas, airstrikes against multi-story buildings, tower blocks, smashed them to ground on the residence in these areas with no warnings. Some of the buildings were warned, but many buildings, as we see, as we receive reports, our field workers in all areas, they just bomb houses with no warnings, leaving dozens of people killed. As of now, the death toll, as we documented that for the 7 days, we're talking about more as of midday Palestine time, almost 181 deaths, including 52 children, 30 women, more than 780 wounds, more than including 230 and more children, 107 more women. The last 24 hours only, as of midday, 38 people killed, including 12 children, 8 women. What's happening is a war. I think Gaza, we witnessed previous wars, 2007, 8, 2012, 2014, but the last 7 days been unprecedented in the level, the force deployed against civilians. As I review the reports from the field, as I see things on the ground, it's not only about excessive use of force against civilians, retaliatory measures, the mere of punishment, collective punishment against million population in Gaza. Nothing can describe the cruelty of these acts. This is against international law. Principles govern the use of force even in times of war. Discrimination, and Israel has no clue about discrimination, to discriminate between, let's say, combatant, non-combatant, to discriminate between legitimate targets and civilian areas, and proportionality. The level of force used against speak, I cannot rewrite. The whole area, it's not only about one block, it's the whole Gaza Strip turned to, as if under earthquake, no safe haven whatsoever in the entire Gaza Strip, which is already been suffering even before the offensive, the last 7 days. Can speak forever about the impact on the lives of the people, how they just in thousands fled in the middle of the night. And now dozens of UNRWA schools are open just to provide some safety, if can be affordable. This, because in previous wars, even UNRWA schools were attacked and dozens of people been while seeking refuge in these areas. So who knows whether those areas are safe enough in the coming days. What else does the community need to act? Again, it's a complete failure to act from the side of the international community. Most, as of now, all what we hear is only diplomatic rhetoric, empty of any content. And in most cases, equating the victim with the victimizers. Are we supposed to be good victims? I don't know. We are not good victims. And we will never be good victims. We have the right to self-determination, right to resistance, by all means. Is accountability. Accountability is a must now, before more and more loss in lives. As long as war crimes go unpunished, the nation will continue to deteriorate. And you all know, especially when it comes to Gaza, in the situation prior to the attack, been very 15 years of closure, collective punishment imposed on civilians, and it's well identified as the biggest open-air prison in the world. And that's true. I live here in Gaza, and I know what's the meaning of an open-air prison, where people are locked down, freedom of movement denied, freedom of transactions mostly denied, 15 years of collective punishment left Gaza Strip on the edge of a catastrophe. Humanitarian crisis in Gaza been human-made, political. We have a great potential for development, but the obstacle is the occupation. We need to address the root cause of occupation, the root cause of the suffering for the people, which is occupation, not only in Gaza, in the entire of the occupied territory. So what we need is accountability. As long as those crimes and those war criminals go unpunished, nothing will change. We need political actions. When it comes to the United States, we all know how the United States, how it's been for decades the main obstacle which hindered the rule of law in the case of Palestine. Through its unwavering support to Israel, to its military occupation and settlement expansion in the entire Palestinian territory. Now there is, I will conclude on this point, there is a great chance before the International Criminal Court. And we all know how the former Trump administration sanctioned through executive orders, sanctioned the personnel of the ICC, sanctioned and threatening the prosecutor, the judges, the staff, and so on. It's a time to change in the United States. It's about time to choose between an international order based on the rule of law, justice, human rights, or a rule of jungle, a chaos, an international chaos. The United States must have a great interest to be handed broker to the situation, not with full support to the occupier over the occupied. It's about time to make a change with Biden's administration. So far, we have not heard any single word about the situation, except for the rhetoric. It's immediate. We need immediate action. We need immediate measures by the states, by the United States, Europe, because the main political actors have to find a way out of this suffering, of this situation. And we all know that as long as Palestinian people are deprived from their basic right to self-determination, as long as we are deprived of our inalienable rights, nothing will change and continue in this vicious circle of violence. We seek nothing more than international law. This is what we demand, and nothing. We need negotiations even. We need to implement international law. We need international conference, for example, with the auspices of the United Nations, whatever, but it's simple fact. What we need to implement international law. That's it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Hamdi, for this very eloquent description of what's going on in Gaza today and the challenges facing the Palestinian people there. We're going to carry on with discussing the situation in Gaza with al-Ghazawi. Aya works as an English language teacher for the Palestinian Ministry of Education. She is also a BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions activist based in Gaza. She has a bachelor's degree in English language and literature and a diploma in general education from Al-Aqsa University. Her writings have been published by We Are Not Numbers, Mondevice, the Palestinian Project on Medium, and Sala Media. She has been interviewed by Telesur English, Sala Media, amongst many others. She's worked as a presenter and a translator for the Gaza video podcast, and was hosted as an online speaker by the Center for Social Justice and Change at a university in East London. She's also been involved in the program for promotion of democratic participation of Palestinian youth. She completed that program with the Masarat Center for Strategic Thinking and Political Studies. So it is an honor to be hosting her today. Thank you, Aya, for joining us despite the fact that you have barely any electricity. Please go ahead and, Aya, where are you in Gaza at the moment? Can you tell us a little bit about the situation as you see it on the ground right now?
Thank you very much for this nice introduction, and thanks for the organizers of this important event and the attendees as well. Well, I live in Gaza, particularly in west of Gaza. And to be honest, I thought that I wouldn't stay alive to attend this event today because of the massacre Israel committed last night. Basically, there are heavy bombardments and airstrikes everywhere, all over the Gaza Strip, day and night. But apartheid Israel particularly intensifies its airstrikes, especially at night, to freak us out and terrify us. Just last night, it committed a heinous massacre in Al-Wahda Street, as it bombed 5 residential buildings over the heads of the civilians inside, causing the death of 37 Palestinian civilians, including 12 women and 8 children. And still paramedics are searching for more bodies under the rubble. But luckily enough, 5 children were found alive. I don't know how they will continue to live with this trauma, and after they have witnessed this, horror. So basically, Gaza is witnessing another massacre, another genocide, and what is happening on the ground is horrifying. Israel targets everybody and everything, and as Hamid said, it targets even residential buildings without any prior warning. It targets towers and blocks. It even wipes out entire families of the civil record, which is, very painful and unbelievable, actually. The fact that Israel targets Gaza, which is only 360 square kilometers, and has about a population of 2 million people, it means that what Israel is committing is a genocide, literally, in the full sense of the word. So now that this toll has risen to 192 Palestinians, including 58 children and 34 women. It targets not only children and women, but also disabled men. It targets everything. Yesterday also it targeted Al-Jalaa Tower, which has international news agencies, including the Associated Press for the US. And consequently, it affected internet access even in Gaza. It destroyed the infrastructure of the already stricken Gaza, and it targeted the main streets so that ambulances cannot reach the civilians, and the places bombed, and even the people cannot reach hospitals. So, you know, Gaza is witnessing another nightmare, and it brings back the bitter memories of the actually belligerent aggressions of Israel against the Gaza Strip in 2008, 2012, and 2014, when settler colonial Israel, you know, claimed the lives of thousands of Palestinians and caused injuries for more than tens of thousands of Palestinians. Many of them have lifelong disabilities. The thing is that people and news outlets, all they're focusing on is that Hamas firing rockets from the Gaza Strip. They never mention the reason. They never mention why we're doing this. So we didn't initiate any of these. Actually, it started all back in 1948 when the Palestinian Nakba took place. The establishment, the very establishment of Israel and the very independent state celebrates, and which actually was marked just yesterday, came at the expense of Palestinian blood and on the ruins of Palestinian villages and towns. In 1948, Israel forcibly displaced actually the 750,000 Palestinians out of their homes and wiped out 500 villages. That series of ethnic cleansing is still ongoing. Yes, it started in 1948, and in my opinion, it started even before, with the help of the British occupation at that time. But it is still ongoing. Ethnic cleansing hasn't finished yet. Genocide hasn't finished yet, and the world is silent. I don't know why is this happening, and why is this allowed to happen with the Palestinian people. We have been suffering from this for decades, for 73 years now. And Israel is doing this even before Hamas came to existence. Hamas, as any other faction, is a liberation movement. And our struggle is not between two equal sides. We're talking about the fourth strongest army in the world. We're talking about the only state which has 243 nuclear heads in the Middle East. And we're talking about a people who are yearning for their national rights, for self-determination, and we only want is that to live in dignity, peace, justice, equality, and freedom. This is what we want. And we are blamed for our resistance. I mean, what are we expected to do when our children are targeted, when we are being killed in broad daylight and with cold blood? And Israel uses F-16 and F-35, which are made by the US. In the US alone, which is important actually to shed the light on this point, the US provides Israel with $3.8 billion every year as a part of military aid. And eventually, Israel uses this aid and uses these weapons against us. It even uses internationally prohibited weapons like white phosphorus, which melts flesh and bones. This is hilarious. Especially on northern Gaza, I don't know if there is anything left of northern Gaza. Entire neighborhoods are wiped out of the map. And still people in the US are paying their tax money to Israel. I think people in the US have to put pressure on their government, on the congresswomen and men and their representatives to condition aid to Israel. This should not be happening. Our children should be playing. They should not be worrying about bombs and fire and all of this. We are being traumatized. We are being slaughtered. This is not fair to us. We are as any other people around the world. And while people around the world enjoy their rights, human rights, for granted, we have to fight. I mean, how come? I just don't understand this. Also, we need to tell the news outlets to stop marketing Israeli propaganda and Israeli narrative. We need to concentrate on the Palestinian narrative. We are not voiceless, but we are devoiced. We need to let the world hear us. What is happening in Palestine is a kind of uprising. It's not only about Gaza, it's also about Jerusalem and about the West Bank. So the thing started, lately in Jerusalem, as Israel threatens 28 Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in occupied Eastern Jerusalem to ethnically cleanse them. And we're talking about 500 Palestinians there. So the Palestinians in Jerusalem started their acts of resistance, and they called on every Palestinian in all parts of Palestine to join their resistance. And this is what we did. Our armed factions in Gaza retaliated for what is happening there. And then comes Israel and collectively punishes 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. 2/3 of them are refugees. I myself am a refugee. I come originally from Yafa, which was ethnically cleansed back in 1948. I've never been there, by the way. I'm not allowed to. But still, I want to go back to my home there, which was demolished and given to Israeli settlers. So we're not talking about much. We're talking about implementing the international law. And as any other people under occupation, we have the full right to resist our occupiers by all means, whether by non-violent means of resistance, such as the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS movement, or even using armed resistance. And this is important. It's our right, it's our legal right, guaranteed by the international law, human declarations, and every humanitarian law even. Gaza have been long suffering from an imposed siege that Israel actually imposed since 2006. We have restrictions on movements. We have lack of electricity. We have a high rate of poverty. We have a high rate of unemployment, especially among youth. So how are people supposed to live? Even the calories, Israel counts the calories that enter the Gaza Strip to enter the minimum amount of food and goods that keep us survive without causing a humanitarian crisis. But again, we're not talking about the humanitarian crisis. People on some news outlets picture it and portray it as a mere issue of a humanitarian crisis. We are talking about people who want liberation, who want self-determination, and who want to get rid of this multi-tiered system of oppression that Israel stands for, namely settler colonialism, occupation, and apartheid. And what is happening in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, is a manifestation of this nature of settler colonialism of Israel that is premised on ethnic cleansing and genocide and massacres. We're not talking about, just yesterday it was the 73rd anniversary of the Palestinian Nakba. And I wish if it was, just a mere memory of a Nakba. It marks only the beginning of the Palestinian Nakba, but not the end. So the question now is, when is this all going to end? And when are the people in the US going to stand with the Palestinians and put pressure on their government to stop this? Before I entered this meeting, I just read through, I had a quick look at news, and I read that the cabinet of Israel, the parliament of Israel, has decided that they want to go on with this onslaught, and they want to go with this massacre, and they have the green light from the US administration. The blood of Palestinians is at the US administration. This needs to be told. And again, now what is to be done? I call upon people to endorse our call of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS movement. We need to boycott Israel on all levels, as happened with apartheid South Africa, and isolate it until it ends its war crimes and crimes against humanity. Also, I want people to share our stories as widely as possible, especially our stories written at We Are Not Numbers. And this is very important because We Are Not Numbers is a youth organization that aims at telling the stories behind numbers reported in news. We are not numbers, guys. People killed are reported as mere statistics in news. Today we have 192 Palestinians killed. Tomorrow it will be more. But we need to remember that every single person of those killed have their stories, have their struggle, have their memories. So the process of dehumanization has to end. We have our dreams. I mean, I'm still 23 years old and I have a lot of dreams to fulfill, but I don't know if I will wake up next morning. Everybody is a target for Israel. We constitute, I don't know what threat to Israel, so that we are being targeted this way. I don't know what to tell my little sister. She's only 8 years old. Our children are weeping. We are terrified. We are trembling. Every time Israel targets a place in Gaza, our home shakes and we tremble out of fear. And I'm telling you that sometimes I feel like my heart is going to stop beating, like literally. I also feel like I'm going to have a nervous breakdown at some point because we have been sleepless for 8 days now. And now as the night starts in Palestine, especially in Gaza, we are afraid that Israel is going to start another massacre and to wipe out entire families again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very moving testimony from the ground, Aya. We are thinking of you. We are worried about you. I was actually very concerned about both you and Hamdi, given the severity of the bombing that's going on, given all of the horror that is unfolding in Gaza and surrounding you. So I know that each one of us on this panel and all the participants in this event feel very strongly about what's going on, and our thoughts are with you. I wish we could do more, but for now, the best we can do is to spread the word and try to organize and mobilize against this horror. One of the most inspiring things, of course, is something that Aya has mentioned, which is that at the moment, unlike previous assaults on Gaza, now we find that the entirety of the Palestinian people is united. The people of Gaza are not alone, as in previous occasions where Palestinians tried to mobilize, but they were so heavily suppressed that they weren't able to rise up. Now the level of organization is incredible across Palestine, starting in Jerusalem, spreading in 1948 Palestine, in the West Bank, in the Shatat. What we are seeing now, even on the Jordanian border, there were clashes. What we are seeing now is that the entirety of the Palestinian people, and I should note the Arab people, not the Arab governments that have betrayed the Palestinian people and betrayed their own populations, but the Arab peoples as well are rising up. I see a lot of strong solidarity. I see a lot of solidarity across the Middle East, in Turkey, in Iran, elsewhere. I see a solidarity across the world. In Europe, the Italian workers have refused to load ships that are filled with machinery, with the machinery of death that is used to destroy the people of Gaza. So, in this context, we brought speakers also from other parts of Palestine that are involved in this mobilization. We often hear, like Aya mentioned, about the situation in Palestine solely either from the lens of the so-called conflict, which is really not a conflict at all, it is colonialism in action, or from the lens of a humanitarian crisis. If the Palestinian is represented, they're usually represented as a humanitarian crisis, somebody in need of help. Well, we don't need help. We need liberation. We need people to stand with us as we fight for our liberation. And I can think of no more inspiring fight than what's happening in Jerusalem today, and what has been happening in Jerusalem for the past month. We have with us Zakaria Oudeh, who is going to initiate the discussion on what's going on in Jerusalem, how it started, the context. He is the director and coordinator for the Civil Coalition for Palestinian Rights in Jerusalem. This coalition, the Civic Coalition for Palestinian Rights, is an independent, non-governmental, non-profit coalition of organizations, institutions, societies, and associations dedicated to the promotion and protection of Palestinian rights in that holy city. Established in 2005, the coalition has been working to combat abuses of Palestinians, human rights abuses under the Israeli colonial occupation through research and legal analysis, advocacy, and human rights education. So we are very honored to be hosting you, Zakaria. We know that you're very involved in important work now, given the severity of the violations going on. So we appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for organizing such event, which is really very important in this moment. I think what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in Jerusalem, what's going on in the rest of the West Bank and in 48, all really connected and all really as a result of the ongoing Nakba, which, yes, it's true, the Nakba started in 1948, but it is going on every day because we are, as a result of facing this colonial settler apartheid regime. In fact, I just came from Sheikh Jarrah half an hour ago, just 10 minutes before we started, because, and just to give you an idea, that the Sheikh Jarrah was completely closed, and all the people in Sheikh Jarrah were locked inside their houses, you know, because the police, they claimed that there was an attack by a Palestinian who ran over 5 or 6 police people who are at the checkpoint, at one of the checkpoint, that they are closing Sheikh Jarrah and preventing the people. So after that, the police became very aggressive. The security forces, the special forces, they closed the whole neighborhood. They didn't allow anybody to stay even outside their houses. So they looked, literally, they looked everybody in all the houses inside their houses. You know, I think the story of Sheikh Jarrah, it's a story which has been going on for nearly 50 years in the Israeli legal, in fact, it's illegal legal system that has been going on. And you know the story that we are talking about 73 household, 28 families, 73 household who they have been living there since 1956, when as a result of an initiative between Jordan, the Jordanian government, and UNRWA, where Jordan provide the land and UNRWA sponsored the construction of the 28 housing or residential unit in the area, and they lived there until 1972, when some settler organization, they start claiming that they own the land since 1985. And since then, the legal battle in the Israeli illegal legal system has been going on. The settlers all the time, they have been taking the families to the court requesting their eviction. We know, maybe, I think you are aware, in 2008 and 9, 13 households were already evicted or displaced. And now there are 19 households. We talk about 7 families, 19 households, 87 people who are under the risk of eviction, or there have been an eviction order, a forced displacement against them by the several Israeli court. As our friend, she mentioned, we are talking about nearly 500 people in the whole neighborhood that are under the risk of the forced displacement. You know why Sheikh Jarrah? I don't want to go to more details because I think some of our friends here with us will talk maybe about more details. In fact, I talk about it because we as a coalition, we are following the case and we provide legal aid to the families in the neighborhood, as well as we do international legal advocacy. to trying to stop the forced displacement of the families in Sheikh Jarrah. But it's very important to mention that Israel, or the Israeli government, the Israeli institution, with the Israeli settler movement, they look at Sheikh Jarrah, not just they selected Sheikh Jarrah, but they look at it as a strategic area. Sheikh Jarrah is the neighborhood that connects the old city of Jerusalem with the north of East Jerusalem. I mean, this is part of the plan that the Israelis, they talk about what they call it the Holy Basin, which is the old city of Jerusalem, from the south, Silwan and all the neighborhoods in the south, and from the east, the Mount of Olive, and from the north is Sheikh Jarrah. This area is like a red line for the Israeli and the Israeli settler movement, where they don't allow any development, any construction, any more increase of Palestinian residents in the area. And all the time, they try to force the Palestinian in this neighborhood to leave their homes, to transfer them out of the area as a strategic area. The other issue is very important to understand what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah. It's very important to look at the whole picture. Now we used to say the whole picture of Jerusalem, but now the whole picture is Gaza, Jerusalem, the West Bank, 1948, all part of Palestine, which are participating in all these protests, in all this resistance against the Israeli colonial settler apartheid regime. But when we talk about Jerusalem, we talk that it's not only Sheikh Jarrah is targeted by the Israeli government, Israeli institution, and the settlers. Most of the neighborhoods are really targeted. We know that Silwan is one of the neighborhood, or one of the area that has been always targeted by the Israeli institution, by the municipality of Jerusalem, by the settler movement. We know that Al-Bustan in Silwan is one of the neighborhood. We talk about 119 families that under the risk of demolition their homes. There is an order of demolition of 119 apartments or houses in Al-Bustan. Batn al-Hawa, we talk about 700 people are facing eviction because they claim that some Jewish families were owning as well the area before 1948. Wadi Yasul as well, 74 homes are under home demolition because they want to expand what so-called is the National Park of West Jerusalem. So there are several neighborhoods that are being targeted. Al-Ghazawi is another neighborhood where it's targeted by home demolition. Every day there are homes that are demolished. The Israeli police, they storm the village or the neighborhood in a daily basis. They raid the houses, they use sound grenade, they use tear gas, they storm the homes, they terrorize the people every day. It is a daily action by the Israeli police in Al-Ghazawi, Jabal al-Mukabbir, Shofat, Beit Hanina, all the different neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. Most of them, there is an Israeli plan. There is an Israeli plan in connection with the Israeli settlement or settler action or activity in Jerusalem. As well, it's not only what we mentioned, but as well, we have witnessed during the last 2 years, and it's important to mention in 2020, there has been the highest expansion of Israeli settlement unit in East Jerusalem. 3,045 settlement unit was put for implementation in East Jerusalem. House demolition as well. During 2020, nearly 190 structures were demolished, including 105 residential structures, displacing nearly 385 persons from their homes, from their livings. So home demolition is another challenge or another policy that Israel has been really increasing or intensify, as well as the Israeli discriminatory urban planning system that has been going on for not only for 54 years, in June, it is for 54 years of Israeli occupation. It has been going on, these policies, since for the last 73 years, since al-Nakba, since 1948, as well as the closure of Jerusalem, restriction of movement of the people. They have been restricting the movement and the access of both Muslim and Christian. I think you are aware during the Easter feast, they prevented the Christian people from reaching the Holy Sepulchre to participate on the feast ceremonies, as much as well as what they have been doing during Ramadan. During Ramadan, they have stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They attack the prayer while they are praying. They use the sound grenade. They use tear gas, even inside the mosque itself. Can you imagine a mosque with thousands of people who were praying? They attack them with sound grenade, with tear gas, with all means of oppression, that they have been attacking the people, and they really created hundreds or tens of people were injured. Even a clinic in the Al-Aqsa Mosque was stormed by the police, and the medical staff was attacked by the Israeli police and the Israeli special forces. You are aware, and you know about the Palestinian protest from the beginning of Ramadan in Damascus Gate, because the Israeli police was trying to prevent the people from using the square outside Damascus Gate, and there was a big protest until our people and our youth, they forced the police to stop preventing the people from using the square, and they forced them to remove all the barriers that were established or were put in outside Damascus Gate. So, I mean, all what we talk about, all these action and all these policies that has been going on against our people everywhere in all the neighborhoods, in all the areas of Jerusalem, it's really part of the Israeli transfer policy. Always Israel or the Israeli institution and government, they always talk about the demographic element, where always they try to keep or maintain a majority of Jewish Israeli people vis-a-vis a small minority of Palestinians, Arab in the city of Jerusalem. And all the policies and all the action that has been going on by the Israeli government is really has one of its main objective is this demographic balance or demographic majority of Jewish vis-a-vis the small minority of the Palestinian people. It's just to conclude that all of these action and all this escalation of Israeli policy in East Jerusalem has been taking place with the encouragement as a result of the position of the previous American administration, the Trump administration, who declared that Jerusalem is the capital of the Israeli state, and they moved their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So the previous administration policy has given the Israeli government and the Israeli institution more green line to continue with its violation, with its not only violation, really, with its crimes that it has been committing against our people in Jerusalem in particular, and in all the occupied territories in general. So all these crimes is being really committed under the eye of the international community, and without any serious action by the international community to stop all these crimes and all these violations. I think it's time that Israel shouldn't continue with its immunity Israel is behaving as if it's above the international law, above the human rights law. It doesn't give any consideration to the international law, although, as you know, East Jerusalem is occupied and it's part of the occupied territories. Therefore, Geneva Convention and international law is applicable to East Jerusalem, and the people in Jerusalem are protected persons according to the human rights and international law.
Thank you very much.
Therefore, we call upon the American community, American people really, to raise your voice, to put pressure in your government, in your Congress people, in order to put pressure to stop all these crimes, all these atrocities that are committed by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people.
Thank you very much, Zakaria, for this very comprehensive overview of what's going on. And I just want to comment from a historical perspective. Of course, this is not just restricted to the Trump administration or even to the current administration, which sent out a shameful statement saying that Israel has a right to defend itself, etc., etc. What that does is actually not only give a green light, it facilitates ongoing colonialism. We know very well that colonialism would not have been established in Palestine in the first place if it wasn't for this so-called international community. It is not an international community, actually. It is a community of colonizing nations that set up the regime in Palestine that we see today, a regime of colonialism, which is an extension of regimes of colonialism that we have seen here in the United States, that we have seen across Africa and Asia, that we have seen in different parts of the world, across the world. And Palestine was one of the latest examples of that. That colonialism continues to be facilitated today by the shameful positions of the European nations, the shameful positions of the United States. The difference is that now the popular mobilization of the Palestinian people is forcing some sections of the progressive movements in these countries to see what is going on. And I think that's a good start, but it's not enough, because as we're going to hear now from Dr. Muna Dajani, the situation on the ground is really tough in a place like Jerusalem. I know that she has family in Sheikh Jarrah. I know that she has a very strong personal connection there. And I really look forward to hearing from her about what the human situation is. We cannot afford to keep on going with this unfolding colonialism. Muna is a research officer at the London School of Economics and Political Science Middle East Center, working on a collaborative research project with Birzeit University entitled Mapping Memories of Resistance, the Untold Story of the Occupation of the Golan Heights. Muna holds a PhD from the LSE. Her research aimed to examine the distinctive livelihood practices by which farming acquires political subjectivity in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. She examined the role of the sumud, the steadfastness or staying on the land as a form of cultural resistance. It is really a great pleasure to welcome you, Muna. I know that you're a daughter of Jerusalem. You're very committed to it. You know what's going on, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Abdel Razzaq. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, and thank you for the great invitation. And so happy to be here, hearing as well from great speakers. I really I don't want to kind of re-emphasize or say like all the points that have been raised by Aya, by Ustaz Zakaria, and I really want to kind of we know the facts that are on the ground are very clear. Settler colonial project exercising its brutal might against Palestinians. This, as we have all said, this is not the result of what happened in the last few weeks. A lot of people are like, as you might have known, like online would ask us, what started it? What actually got to, why did it get so bad? And it kind of really emphasizes how, Palestinians are so dehumanized, and how the memory of mainstream media and the way it portrays the struggle of Palestinians is so short-sighted that people need to be reminded every time of this settler colonial project and its actions against Palestinians. I really don't want to take a lot of time. I wanted to highlight my how I see Sheikh Jarrah as symbolism of Palestine, and how I see it as a quest for belonging. From a personal point of view, it's my grandparents' house is one of the houses that's facing expulsion in August. And I just wanted, again, to kind of put like a time frame on things and really speak of, this has been a reality that we have grown up with. The looming threat of eviction, the looming threat of expulsion has always been there in our life as children. And I think it's really like very symbolic, Sheikh Jarrah, because as we grew older, started realizing what's happening around us, Sheikh Jarrah was changing from this very tranquil, this very small and quiet street full of beautiful trees and orchards that Palestinians, families, refugees themselves have planted to reroot themselves in the land. As we have seen, probably a lot of the participants have seen lots of videos of Nabil al-Kurd, of others, my family as well, who have spoken of the trees in the houses. We are not doing this as a part of a territorial conquest or a territorial claim. We're not, as Israel has also framed it, as a land dispute and a land ownership dispute. For Palestinians, this is a quest for belonging. Sheikh Jarrah actually symbolizes the fact that we want to belong. We want to reroot ourselves after our uprootedness in the Nakba. And I really remember Sheikh Jarrah like that as a child, you know, as this place of tranquil and a place of solidarity and community. My family would always speak about how they found community in Sheikh Jarrah and how they've built their identity again in that place. But growing up, as I said, you start to see what's happening in Palestine, the continuous ethnic cleansing and the ethnic cleansing of Jerusalem was happening in Sheikh Jarrah as we grew up. I remember that we started slowly seeing the changes in our neighborhood, and how the presence of settlers became more and more visible, and how slowly they started shaping and reshaping our landscape with even this what they claim to be Siddiq Shumaun cave that they turned into a shrine that used to be kind of a dumpster, you know, in the old days when we were young. And seeing that, you know, their territorial claim to Sheikh Jarrah actually manifests itself on the ground, and their territorial claim to all of Palestine actually we're visibly seeing it as children growing up. And slowly we see it today, and where we see Sheikh Jarrah today, the case of like violent expulsion of the Palestinian families, and the fact that, you know, turning Sheikh Jarrah, as we see today from the videos, into like a military zone, basically, where settlers are only allowed. Are we seeing another Hebron case, another Hebron case of Shari' al-Shuhada? Are we seeing a lot of, this is the reality of Palestinians everywhere. So I wanted to also emphasize that Sheikh Jarrah is not about the houses. It's about the intergenerational struggle. And I really want to emphasize that, because I don't see it today as the house of my aunt, Samira, or I don't see it as the house of my father only. I see it as an intergenerational place of rootedness for me to be able to kind of pass it on to my son and to my children in the future, and to his cousins and to his the extended family that we want to continue to be present. So it is connecting us to the Nakba, and I do hope that we will remain in that place to be able to kind of pass it on. And I really also wanted to highlight something that my dad said that I really find so inspirational in this time. As Abed mentioned, it's a time of decolonial mobilization. It's the current time when Palestinians are coming together and in unity. We're not saying that this is a struggle of Gaza separately. This is the struggle of Palestinians inside Israel. Everybody's coming together to say this is one struggle. And as much as Israel has tried to fragment us in geographical locations, in different hierarchies of movement, of access of movement and right to movement and right to belong, we are actually one voice today. And I'm sure others will speak of that. But my dad, I also grew up hearing my father, the Hood, speak of like the grief of the Nakba that is present in Sheikh Jarrah today, but also present in Baqa in 1948. And the fact that he always had that pessimism about the future, you know, and looking for the future in this pessimist way because of what happened in the Nakba and the ongoing Nakba. But today my dad speaks of hope. He was telling me a few days ago that I see hope in this great mobilization that the youth have led, that Palestinians all over Palestine have led. It gives me hope. It makes me feel that our voices are heard, that things can change to the better. So I really think that this moved me really so much, because I know that that this is what's happening today on the ground. And this is why Sheikh Jarrah is so symbolic and so important. And we need to kind of raise our voices, as Zakaria said. It's not only Sheikh Jarrah. Let's amplify the voice and the energy and the mobilization we put for Sheikh Jarrah, for all over Palestine. Let's just, you know, do it for Silwan, for Asawiya, for South Hebron Hills, for Lid, for Ramle, for Akka, for everywhere that's facing displacements today. And I think this is the really important. This quest for belonging is so strong in Palestine. It's so powerful within the Palestinian youth, diaspora, the young and the old. It's an intergenerational quest for belonging that I think is going to fuel us for the next decades and on and on. So with, like, you know, I think as all of us feel, you know, I wake up in the morning with lots of energy to start a new day and to continue fighting for Palestine. I end it with really tears in my eyes, seeing what's happening in Gaza and following just tweets and messages from everyone. And I really think that this hope is what's keeping us alive. And hearing Aya speak as well is really emotional for me, because I feel, yes, we just want to live. We want to live in our country. We have the right to self-determination, and we belong here. We are not going anywhere. We're going to stay in our thousands, in our millions, everywhere around the world, whether inside Palestine itself or everywhere. We're going to resonate the voice and justice of Palestine. And yeah, I think these are the things I wanted to say today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muna, for this wonderful reflection that mixes the academic and the personal, the theoretical with the lived experience. And I think it's very important for us to both convey our lived experience, but also generate concepts that can frame it against this framing that attempts to erase it and that has been so pervasive historically. And I think one of the beautiful things about this moment is that we're beginning to overthrow, or at least are starting a movement to overthrow this false framing of what is going on, partly through centering people's realities in Palestine. Now, we're going to come back to Jerusalem and Sheikh Jarrah in a second, but first, moving on from a theme that Muna has emphasized, the unity of the Palestinian people. One of the most incredible things that happened as the people were mobilizing in Jerusalem is that in 1948 Palestine, their compatriots rose up and they came with incredible strength across 1948 Palestine, in Lid, in Akka, in all of these areas that are mistakenly referred to sometimes as areas where Israeli Arabs live in. Well, they're called Palestinians. They are the Palestinians that managed to stay in Palestine. It is called Palestine, in fact. You know, there's this pressure on Palestinians to refer to it in Israel. They criminalize you if you call your country by its name. They want you to adopt the terminology that has been forced upon the Palestinian people by the colonizing Western nations, the so-called international community. So actually, our people on the ground have spoken up. And we have with us one of the activists from there that can convey what is going on, Riya Al'Sanah. I'm really honored to host you today. I've known Riya's work for a long time. She's a great organizer. And thank you very much for joining us, Riya.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the previous speakers. I kind of want to really continue from where Muna stopped about the question and the kind of the how deep the issue of expulsion runs in Palestinian blood. And that it's not a question of just Sheikh Jarrah. And since last Sunday, and even before that, Palestinian 48ers were kind of going to Jerusalem to express solidarity and to be in solidarity with the people of Jerusalem, those present in Al-Aqsa Mosque and those resisting expulsion in Sheikh Jarrah. Actually, mass buses of Palestinians from the north of Palestine and from the south of Palestine were on their way to Jerusalem to be in solidarity, to be in active solidarity, not just in an expression of solidarity, but in actions of solidarity. And they were blocked, and people marched on their masses on highways, determined to be in Jerusalem and determined to be a part of the resistance that was taking place in Jerusalem. For Jerusalem is not only of religious significance for Palestinians, but Jerusalem symbolizes the question of Palestine. It is the epicenter of our struggle, not only for its religious significance, but also for its political significance, for its cultural significance. And I think you cannot see or separate what is happening in Palestine 48 today from what took place in Jerusalem throughout that month of resistance, the month of Ramadan. Actually, it is the heroic resistance of the people of Jerusalem, their resistance to protect Al-Aqsa Mosque from Israelis and settler invaders that were coming to designate our religious and holy sites. But in doing that, they're actually attacking our whole struggle for liberation. And so it's really the heroic fights and the heroic victories that people of Jerusalem won that ignited the fire and the rest of Palestine. So in that sense, that the rupture or the uprising that occurred in Palestine 48 was from the beginning one that is very clear in its declaration of not being solely about what is happening in Palestine 48, but is a declaration of the connection and the relationship between the oppression that Palestinian in 48 experience and the bigger national question and the struggle for liberation on a much bigger scale. And we saw it exploding really on Sunday, not this Sunday, the Sunday before that, when demonstrations were organized across Palestine 48 in kind of solidarity, but not solidarity in kind of someone that you do far away, but in solidarity in the sense of belonging to the same stream of struggle. And those demonstrations were violently attacked by the Israeli police. And that really just kind of started a flame of resistance in Palestine 48. And what happened next is mostly people kind of know. And I think it's again the power of what's happening in 48 and how Jerusalem was kind of set afire for Palestinians of 48 to kind of resist in the way that they did. Was again what Muna was saying, is the idea of expulsion, and it really showed us how the idea of expulsion and the feeling of expulsion runs really deep for Palestinians, whatever they are. It's not just a kind of a feeling of the past, but it's an existing reality. So when you see Palestinians in the Naqab coming out in protest in solidarity with Sheikh Jarrah, they're not only in solidarity with Sheikh Jarrah, they're also coming up and rising because they know that expulsion is something that they will also face. 80,000 Palestinians in the Naqab will face expulsion in the near future. Palestinians in Yafa were coming out in demonstrations only last month because they were also facing expulsion. So the idea of expulsion is one that is a living memory, and the heroic resistance in Jerusalem showed people that they can also resist. They can also be part of this, part of the process of resistance. But what really kind of another element that tipped it for Palestinians in 48 was Tuesday, and after the Jerusalemites again won a great victory of stopping the settlers from being able to march in Jerusalem to celebrate the unification of Jerusalem, i.e. the colonization of Jerusalem. They were out looking for vengeance. They were out looking for blood. They were out looking to attack Palestinians where they were because they couldn't do that in Jerusalem. So they organized themselves in groups, specifically attacking Palestinians in so-called mixed cities representative of coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. Those cities represent nothing of coexistence between Palestinians and Israelis. They represent the kind of structural oppression that is deeply rooted in this settler colonial project. And you've probably seen the videos of violence of settlers going around attacking Palestinians, burning homes, shooting people on the streets, and Palestinians really in their cities and in their community, in their villages and in their towns, resisting, defending themselves, attacking anything that symbolizes Israeli state institutions and Israeli state structures, particularly Israeli police stations, particularly the Israeli police cars, and confronting the Israeli police, whatever they are. And these confrontations really represent not only kind of a question of solidarity, but also the particularities that Palestinian 48ers have been feeling and experiencing over the last decades of police brutality. But I want to kind of not dwell on what's been happening, because I'm sure that a lot of you have seen what has been going on, from kind of the brutality. Over 700 people have been arrested since May 9th. Huge, massive violations of their right during and after arrest. A lot of people have been interrogated not only by the police but by the Shabak as well. A lot of minors have been arrested, and what really symbolizes kind of those who are resisting on the streets and those who are coming en masse on the streets is young people. There's a lot of youth on the streets. In Haifa, you would be walking around the streets when there were clashes with the Israeli police and the Israeli settlers, and youth will be on the streets, and they would have a street corner that they would all be congregated in, and they would form barricades around it, and they would all be chanting, "This is the liberated part of Haifa, this is the liberated part of Haifa." It was really a sense of kind of, how do you exercise liberation? How do you exercise liberation in practice? And I think the power of the moment, there's two kind of main things that I think are extremely powerful about what's happening now. One, that they really show the failure of the Israeli settler colonial project. Israel settler colonialism has really worked to fragment Palestinian people. When we talk of fragmentation, it's not only a question of geographical fragmentation. It's fundamentally a question of political fragmentation and cultural fragmentation between the Palestinian people, trying to break us apart from each other, trying to make us so involved in our day-to-day expressions of our oppression that make us so different from other Palestinians. So for Palestinian 48ers to be thinking about their reality of expression as different from what is happening in Gaza, and as different of what's happening in the West Bank, and as different from what is happening to the vast majority of the Palestinian people who are refugees. And specifically since the year 2000 and the killing of 13 Palestinian Israeli citizens, protesters, when they came out in solidarity and in action as part of the Second Palestinian Intifada, the Israeli state had a specific policy of how do we integrate Palestinians 48ers within the orbit of the Israeli state? How do we minimize their national feelings and their national connections to the rest of the Palestinian people? And they have worked on doing this through kind of economic policies. So if you see, a lot of Palestinian 48ers are now in the high-tech business, and they're all making all this sorts of money, and the integration and the kind of driving home kind of the ethics and the ethics of neoliberal policies of individualism. And this has really been the Israeli state policy since 2000. This is their strategy of further fragmentation between the Palestinian people and isolating Palestinians in 48 from the rest of the Palestinian collective body. And I think what we have seen in the past week have really said very clearly that this project has failed. And in a way, a lot of us were surprised, because only the last elections, figures like Mansour Abbas, who called for complete integration with the Israeli state, abandoning our Palestinian national identity, won massive votes in the election. So if you asked me 3 weeks ago, I would have said that Palestinian 48ers are in the kind of the epicenter of our political downturn, and kind of it's a kind of a gloomy reality for us in 48. But I have been proven wrong, and I think a lot of us have been proven wrong. And I think the second important thing about what's happening at the moment is not only the unity, the extreme sense of unity, and I think you could only feel that if you were on the streets, of the feelings that were emerging when people were raising the Palestinian flag, the feeling that we were feeling when we were marching and chanting for Gaza and chanting as part of a collective Palestinian body. It is something that I have never experienced, the sense of unity and the sense of connection, not only between Palestinian communities in 48, but also between 48 and the rest of the Palestinian collective. So that's one. But the other important thing that I think is that I think we will carry with us, and it's our duty to kind of cherish and think about how we harness for the next for the period to come, is the extreme sense of collective identity and self-organizing that has been happening in Palestine 48. There have been neighborhood watch that have been organized almost in every city, in every town. People who have never worked together are now working together in collective spaces to defend themselves from Israeli kind of settler colonial organized and non-organized violence. So the settlers and the kind of the police and the army at the same time. So you have neighborhood watch that have been organized. You have doctors and nurses coming together to deliver medical services to people in Palestinian neighborhoods, because Israeli medical services are not entering to deliver. You have kind of mental health advisors and people delivering services for children who are traumatized from the violence that they have seen, and to parents of political prisoners who have been arrested over the past period. You have volunteer legal teams coming together to defend protesters. People have been organizing en masse to send food to Lid, because people probably know that Lid has been completely cut off from the rest of the have been completely cut off. People are scared to go out of their homes to get food, to go to the supermarkets and so on. And so people have been organizing food parcels to send to Lid, to the extent that people in Lid have said, yo guys, we've got too much food coming in, coming in here. A general strike has been organized, has been announced for next Tuesday for Palestinian citizens of 48. So there's a sense of kind of the reconnecting of who we are as a people, and what does it mean to collectively organize and be autonomous from Israeli state structures. So this is kind of really a breaking point from the discourse that has been developed through the defeat of Oslo, of kind of integration, citizenship, and going into the Israeli Knesset, and that's how we achieve our rights. Actually, what has been happening in the last week, and is an example of what it means to collectively organize as Palestinians, as dissident Palestinians in this under settler colonialism. And I think this has been fundamentally powerful for us as a Palestinian community that are quote unquote citizens of the Israeli state, and for years have been fed that what we need to do to kind of achieve equality is to integrate within the orbits of the state. I think what the last week has shown is that people have no appetite for that anymore. That what we have appetite for more is connecting with our collective Palestinian body, and that we have the right and that we have the capability for autonomous self-organizing. And that's what's been so inspiring about the last period. The question now is what happens, what happens next, and how do we continue carrying this energy? And that's a question that is preoccupying a lot of us, but one that it is challenging. It will be challenging for all of us to deal with, but it's fundamentally a different question that we were dealing with just 2 weeks ago, which is absolutely incredible and absolutely inspiring. So yeah, I can run on forever, but I know that there's so many speakers coming after me. But And I think this is what's, maybe a little bit what the different context of what we are feeling. For us, what we've been feeling is that our only way to kind of be in solidarity and to kind of resist oppression that the Palestinian people have been facing, be it in the West Bank or in Gaza, is to continue self-organizing and to continue in this path. Whether we will be successful or not, only history will tell. But I guess we're trying, and that means that I will. And maybe this is just my way of saying that I won't be able to stay on this meeting until its end because I have other stuff to do. But all power to you and to us, and we will be free. And I think this week has shown us that we have the power and we have the capability and we have the skills and we have the determination to chart our own future, and we will chart our own future.
Well, thank you very much, Riya. I know that you've been working really hard during those moments when mass mobilizations were not taking place. And I think what we're seeing today is a product of the hard work that so many great organizers like yourself put into building the movement, even in times when it was very quiet. I know that you did a lot of great work with Tal'at, the feminist mobilizations that were going on in Palestine. You've done a lot of research with the Who Profits Research Center, focusing on how the Israeli settler colonial project is underpinned by a political economy of militarization and so on and so forth. So thank you for all this great work. Good luck with all the work that you're doing right now. And we're going to move on to another person who has to leave us because she's also involved in so much activism. Now we're going to go to the United States with Noura Erakat. Noura is a US-based Palestinian academic and activist. She's a professor at Rutgers University. She's a human rights attorney as well. Her work is at the Department of Africana Studies and the program in criminal justice at Rutgers, where she researches human rights law, humanitarian law, national security law, refugee law, social justice, and critical race theory. She's also a co-founding editor of Jadaliya, and she's the author of Justice for Some, Law and in the Question of Law and Occupation, Law and in the Question of Palestine, which appeared with Stanford University Press in 2019 and won the 2019 Palestine Book Awards. Also won the Independent Publisher Book Awards, Bronze Medal in Current Events, Foreign Affairs. Now, besides all this academic background, Noura also has a very strong connection to Jerusalem. Her family is from Abu Dis. Her cousin actually recently got murdered just before the mobilizations in Jerusalem. And in a way, it's through so many murders that took place, so much killing, so much harassment that Palestinians have been facing, so much checkpoint of violence. All of this accumulation can explain why people are rising up. It's decades of living under these horrendous conditions. I believe his body has still not been released to Noura and their family. So Professor Erakat, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Abed. Thank you to everybody here. I just want to say that to the participants as well as to the attendees, that what is so powerful about this is the fact that this is all Palestinian, and it's Palestinians across deliberate, juridical, and violent demarcations that separate us from one another. That there have been deliberate attempts to hold us either in open air prisons or to prevent us from return or to forcibly exile us or to contain us in Bantustans or to distinguish us with blue passports and green passports. And all of that effort has been done in an effort to suppress our nationhood as a singular people, with the right to belong, as Dr. Muna Dajani so eloquently put it. Our struggle is for the right to belong, not the right to be conquerors, not the right to be masters, but the right to belong, the right to stay. And this is something that's been severely obfuscated by the so-called peace process, which has created a false parity that what is at stake is two people struggling over for one land, which completely obfuscates the power dynamic that separates us. I've had to repeatedly remind audiences that the president, and I say this in quotes because I don't know anybody who would identify them as his or her or their president, Mahmoud Abbas, can't travel without an Israeli permit. What kind of parity is there if the so-called president of the so-called state can't travel without an Israeli permit? And so the first thing we have to do is abandon this logic. I'm so moved that we're all here in one another's company, and I'm frankly floored by the brilliance. I was floored by Hamdi Shaqqura's reference that we will never be good victims. This idea that the world is searching for the perfect victim, which basically means that we are waiting to be saved. We're not waiting to be saved. We're waiting for solidarity to join us and struggle for our freedom. So no, we will not be victims lying fallow, waiting for you to pick us up. We will resist. Or Aya having to remind us that she didn't know if she was going to be alive today. What kind of reality is that? If she can't commit to an appointment because her life is not guaranteed because what's happening today in Gaza is an absolute massacre. Or the reminder from Riya, who is telling us Palestinians might be citizens, but there's no equality in a settler colony. It's not guaranteed. First of all, there's no constitution in Israel. Second of all, in the basic laws that they do have, there's no guarantee for equality because that would negate the purpose of the state, which is predicated on discrimination, on exclusion, on Jewish supremacy. And we are expected around the world to celebrate that. We have to break through that fear of silence, that being a victim to mass atrocities is not a blank check to create mass atrocities. And the only reason that's become palatable to anyone, because there's been mass atrocities against people of African descent who are subject to the transatlantic slave trade. There have been mass atrocities against Armenians and Kurds. There have been mass atrocities against Haitians who have risen up in revolution and are still being punished for liberating the first slave colony. It has not given anyone a blank check to create new mass atrocities. And yet in this situation, that's what's expected of us. So when we fight, we are not just fighting for Palestinian freedom, we're fighting for a humanity that's actually predicated not on the centering of Western man and Western civilization, but a humanity that actually includes all of us. I want to just say a few words about Gaza. And the use of force. And here I just want to, what I can offer in terms of, as a legal scholar, I study Israel's use of force. Surprise, surprise, oftentimes that work isn't taken as seriously because we can be victims of that force, we can be assailants in the use of force, but we cannot be experts on the use of force that's used against us. So let me just affirm, we have studied this use of force. What Israel has done, and this has to do so much with my cousin Ahmed, who's still held in captivity in a refrigerator at Tel Aviv University, who was gunned down at a checkpoint and then blamed for his murder, despite damning evidence to the contrary. And in response to the efforts that we've made in order just to release his body for a proper burial, Defense Minister Benny Gantz, aggressive Minister Benny Gantz, announced that not only will they not release the body of Ahmed and 62 other Palestinians held hostage after death, but that they will dig up other bodies in order to hold them hostage, right? So what explains the ease with which Israel can kill us? It's not that they just get away with it. It's not that the international community doesn't care about Palestinians, which is also very true, because racism is and colonialism is at the core of this. It explains people just expect us to die, right? But Israel has done much more than that in the way that it has changed the laws of war, the laws of armed conflict, of what is acceptable. So it's not just saying that what it's done to us is okay, but it's also planting new seeds for warfare that then other belligerent nations can use in their aggression against unprotected peoples. It begins in 2000, when Israel, in the course of the second, what we know as the second Palestinian Intifada, which is obviously not the second because we've never stopped resisting, but shifts from a framework of occupation to warfare, where it embraces military violence against the Palestinians within the West Bank and Gaza. And it announces that not only is it assassinating Palestinians under its protection, but that it has a right to do so. It plants the seeds from shifting from what we know as extrajudicial assassinations to what now is this neutered term of targeted killings that makes us think, oh, these are precise, these are signature strikes, they're just getting one person. But in fact, all of it is violent and it is assassination. The way that Israel creates this logic is to say that the territory that it withdrew from in Area A is no longer under its effective control, so that it can use military force there and continue to use occupation law in the other territories. Completely new logic. And in fact, it's so new, they created a new category of war. They called it armed conflict short of war, because they did not want to call it a civil war, in which case they would have to recognize that Palestinians actually live within their jurisdiction and that it oversees a legal apartheid regime. They did not want to call it an international armed conflict because they would have had to recognize that Palestinians are sovereigns in their own land and that this is an actual war, international armed conflict, subject to all the regulations of warfare. Instead, they called it armed conflict short of war so that they can use military force against us while not allowing us the ability to fight back, so that they can frame that as terroristic and criminal, when it is in fact legitimate. I'm sorry. How do you turn this off? Our use of force, and this has been said by my brothers and sisters and Gaza and everybody on this call, our use of force is legitimate, it is just, it is moral. If you want to distinguish it from the tactics that we're using in our use of force, then do that. But that's not because we don't have the right to use force. That's because we have crude weapons that don't have the ability to target. Let us make that distinction clear. If we want to, I personally am very critical of the law because the law has been weaponized against us as well. But if in the moment of anti-colonial fervor, additional protocol 1, Article 1, the first article, subsection 4, says that peoples have the right to use force against racial domination, alien domination, and colonial regimes. The condition of Palestinians has been a universal condition. It's anachronistic today because we remain one of the outstanding issues on an international agenda for decolonization. And so people seem to forget. And as Fanon reminds us, the liberal community only becomes concerned with nonviolence when the natives become violent, but not when colonialism, not when our oppressors remain violent. And what's happened in the Gaza Strip has been absolutely grotesque, absolutely unprecedented in our history. They have caged us and asked us to die quietly, and we will not. So I just want to say, I send massive love, I send massive energy. I want to lift up everybody who has been doing this labor, who has been tireless on these front lines, who has risked themselves. We see you, we appreciate you, we have not forgotten you. We are in this. And I urge our allies to be in this with us as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noura. And on this note, there are so many people that helped make this event happen. I'd like to thank Fadi Khafaiti, who's running this event at the moment. I'd like to also acknowledge the work of Ussama Makdisi making it happen. Also Walid Afifi and Shireen Seqali at UC Santa Barbara, Dr. Eid Mustafa and Dr. Subhi Ali at the Jerusalem Fund. All of you have done a great work. Now, we're going to move on now back to Jerusalem. And we're going to hear from Akram Salhab, who is an activist on the ground there. Akram, of course, has training in political theory. He holds a master's in that from Oxford University. He has a long experience in activist work on Palestine and mobilizational work on Palestine. And he also has experience in migrant justice work in different countries. So I'm really honored to have him here with us today, straight from Jerusalem. Akram, please go ahead.
Thanks, Abed. Thanks so much. And thanks so much for organizing the talk today. I'm just going to give kind of, first of all, an overview of, the current, let's say, circumstances that have produced the events of the past few weeks, and maybe give a few snapshots of some of the things I've been seeing around me about and what's taking place. And then I think other speakers on Jerusalem will give a bit more of a context about kind of the youth that have really been leading and fighting and winning these victories for the people of Jerusalem and the people of Palestine more generally. And I think the context of what I want to talk about follows on from what Zakaria was speaking about, which was the confiscation of land and the settler colonial project in its different manifestations in different areas of Jerusalem. But the settler colonial project also has an impulse and a need to depoliticize and fragment and destroy Palestinians politically, socially, and culturally in order to achieve its objectives, in order to reduce any possible form of resistance to it. And in Jerusalem, that's taken many different forms over a number of years. Obviously, we know about arrests and the regime of arresting key activists and key institutions. Key political organizations, including cultural, social institutions, are routinely closed. They've had 90 organizations in Jerusalem that have been closed over the past few years. And events that take place on Women's Day, for instance, that we saw in March, and other international national days of celebration are routinely closed down, literally debke or a speaking event or things that are taking place indoors. And this impulse is designed to destroy Palestinian presence in Jerusalem. If you have no cultural, social life, you don't have anything binding you together as a people. And Israel's objective is to try and make that happen in Jerusalem in order that it can continue and implement its plans for ethnic cleansing and to decimate and destroy any potential resistance to that. And the other way that this kind of manifests itself is that they also want to reduce the sense of this being a Palestinian city. And this is why things have somewhat come to a head in this period of time, because Ramadan is a period of time when anyone who walks through the old city or in its surrounds will know very clearly that it's a Palestinian city. There are Ramadan lights everywhere. There are thousands of Palestinians coming and going from the mosque in the evenings. And one of the most visible expressions of this is Palestinians staying up quite late after the iftar, going around Damascus Gate, being out in the streets and sitting on the steps of Damascus Gate, which is where people tend to congregate after iftar and after the prayers in the mosque, Tarawih prayers. So Israel this year decided as a provocation, but also in part of their attempt to squeeze Palestinians to reduce their presence, to reduce the sense of this being a Palestinian city, to ban Palestinian youth from sitting on the steps. And this was the start of a great resistance from the Palestinian youth who were out in the streets and confronting Israeli troops and Israeli border police wherever they found them, including in the 3 pillboxes that they built right by Damascus Gate. And this continued for about 10 days. But Damascus Gate was the main point of confrontation before attention turned to Sheikh Jarrah and people began focusing on what was happening there. But I think this concept is really important to understand, because it's what elements of oppression accompany the forced expulsion of people from their homes. Is all of this attempt to depoliticize, to break down, to destroy, and we have lots of other examples of how that takes place in the city. What's happened, and quite surprisingly, I think, for what the Israeli state had hoped would happen, is that attempts to either include Palestinians in the state, to depoliticize them by building and insisting that by building new schools which have Israeli curricula, not Palestinian curricula, is to have this quasi-integration of Palestinians into Jerusalem, and then a destruction of the Palestinian essence of the city at the same time. But the young people haven't accepted that, and we've seen that in the streets, that people of all walks of life have been out late into the night confronting Israeli soldiers wherever they find them. Initially at Damascus Gate, then for a period of time when the victory is won at Damascus Gate, people turned to Sheikh Jarrah. And Sheikh Jarrah was where I'm sure Mariam and Dahoud will speak more about what's been happening down there, so I'll just skip past that. But a victory was won in that it was the High Court delayed the ruling for another month, because obviously they did not want to announce the new ruling in the middle of this uprising that was taking place. And then Israel's third sort of provocation was to attempt to attack Palestinian worshippers in Al-Aqsa compound during Laylat al-Qadr, the holiest night of the year in the Muslim character, to try and attack people in the compound and inside the mosque itself, and leading up to Jerusalem Day. So not just a provocation on the holiest night of the year for Muslims in the whole city, but also leading up to Jerusalem Day to attempt to clear the mosque of all the Palestinian worshippers and bring gangs of armed settlers into Al-Aqsa compound to wreak havoc. And my parents have a shop in the old city in near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And every year we normally close the shop and put down the metal hatches, because the Jerusalem Day March consists of a march through all the old city, through the Muslim quarter, and banging on all of the doors, attempting to break into shops, shouting death to the Arabs, spray painting it onto shop walls. And when you come the day after, you see the evidence of this rampage that's taken place. And this march was due this year to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque, and was also due to go to Damascus Gate, which is where they often congregate in their thousands, attacking camera people as well, and any Palestinian they find out in the streets. So this is a day when, if you're Palestinian in Jerusalem, you know to go indoors. But actually on this year, on the back of this mobilization, the Israelis couldn't do it. They attacked Al-Aqsa from the night till the morning in an attempt to clear Palestinians out, and they would not leave. They knew that they could not bring in their settlers without a massive confrontation taking place. And so they knew the same was taking place at Damascus Gate, because they'd just seen it happen. They just tried to put barriers in Damascus Gate, so they knew they couldn't march thousands of genocidal, fanatical settlers through down there without there being another confrontation. So they were forced to go to Jaffa Gate, and then events in Gaza unfolded, and that kind of, even their presence there didn't last too long. I think that, really we need to describe these events as a victory, because they were won with extreme courage by a lot of young people who have kind of gone out night after night, stood in the streets, have been beaten up, have had these sound bombs going off next to them, have been arrested, have had shit vans spraying them with this skunk water, have had cavalry charges taking place at them. Everyone's walking around with bullet wounds, beatings. It's definitely this extreme reaction by the Israelis at trying to beat people into submission, but it really hasn't succeeded. And not only has it succeeded, it's turned against them, and they've lost every single point of confrontation that they've tried to pick in the city. And so I just wanted to maybe give you a sense of kind of a few of the things that we've been seeing. The other evening we were out by Sheikh Jarrah, and there was a settler who came by, and this is this tactic that they've been using in 48, but they've also been using in Jerusalem, is to now unleash the settlers to do what the army is willing to do, but it's easier if you have people who have literally no qualms whatsoever to attack wanton violence right, left, and center. So there have been settlers unleashed on different neighborhoods. Sheikh Jarrah had 200-300 settlers attempt to march into it the other night and smashing up shops and restaurants and homes on the way in, destroying a few dozen cars. They were eventually stopped. At the end of the street here, where I'm in Bet Hanina, there's settlers who've driven up and shut the road from here, walking around with submachine guns, pointing them at cars. On the other end of the road, there's Israeli soldiers who have been confronting Palestinian youth. The other end of the neighborhood, there's also confrontations by the roundabout. And Bet Hanina is quite far away from the city, so if it's happening in Bet Hanina, it's happening everywhere else. It's quite a relatively quiet area by comparison with Sheikh Jarrah or Silwan or other places closer to the old city. But the response has also been quite extraordinary. So the other night when we were in Sheikh Jarrah and we saw a settler had come and shot a man in the head, And we would just happen to turn up at the house. There were very few of us there, about 10 people, who just were milling around to see what happened because we'd heard this shooting. And within about 10 minutes, about 200 people had turned up, all young men in cars, ready to make sure that they were there to protect the house. And when we talk about self-organization, this is what it means. And you know, organized through WhatsApp groups, organized online. People know that if we're attacked, the only way is to defend ourselves is to stand together. And you know, there's a few Palestinians who, when they've come under attack, they've tried to call the police, and the police turn up very late, kind of mildly kind of encourage people to leave, might kind of half-heartedly chastise people, but are not going to investigate the essentially attempted murder of this guy who was shot in Sheikh Jarrah, or the other wanton crimes and violence that are being unleashed on Palestinians. And I think this is the new tactics of the Israeli state, is they feel that they've lost control. I mean, on Jerusalem, I'm not sure what else they could do to break the demonstrators' will in Al-Aqsa, in Damascus Gate, in Sheikh Jarrah, and then people stood their ground and they fought and they won. And you know, lots of friends have asked me, you know, how are things there? And it seems really dark and it seems really difficult. But actually, when you're here, it's a completely different sense. You know, obviously it's really intimidating, and being out is, you know, there's lots of soldiers, and it's not like something that's easy. But all around you, you see thousands of young people who are ready to fight for their rights and ready to confront this. And the fact that Jerusalem has lit a spark that's spread everywhere else just tells you that this isn't something that's exclusive to Jerusalem. And this is something that all Palestinians share, and the speed with which it's spread, I think, is testament to the fact that years and years and years of Israeli state policies to break us up has not succeeded. But those attempts have not ended, and this is an important point to note. The really dangerous thing that will happen now is if we let any area of Palestine fight this alone. Jerusalem can't fight it alone, 48 can't fight it alone, and now, as always, they're trying to keep the focus on Gaza and make things quiet here by unleashing settler mobs inside people's homes and neighborhoods, and this mass arrest campaign that Riya was talking about. So we can't make, and you know, one of my cousins works in the north, and he drove up there, and the police stopped him and said, "You're from Jerusalem, you have to go back." No one is allowed to come from Jerusalem, because they know, as people from 48 came to Jerusalem when things were lively here, now that they have these lynch mobs roaming around Lid and Yaf in particular, but other cities inside as well, the Palestinians from Jerusalem are going to stand in solidarity. So they want to break that bond. And at every moment, they're looking to break that bond. And our responsibility as Palestinians, first of all, is that we have to make sure that every point, wherever we are, is a point where there's confrontation and that there's a challenge to the Israeli state, because otherwise all the resources and time and energy can be focused on Gaza and the massacre that's happening there, or wherever else they choose to focus their violent attacks. And I think that for everyone listening and who's involved in international solidarity work, the focus now is really, what can we do to make sure that that has real meaning? How can we have something that's an immediate impact? You know, we go on demonstrations, we stand in the street, but what can we do to make sure that actually we're not handling Israeli goods? If we're involved in unions, what dock workers can we approach? If we're involved in universities, what can we do to turn this outrage that people feel and the symbolic challenge that we present when we go to demonstrations into something that can be really impactful? And wherever you are and whatever walk of life you are, you can do something about that. And I'm sure there can be discussion about precisely what that is, but really the time is now. There's an enormous Israeli war machine focused on us. The threat is very real. There's people's spirits here are very high, but we really need to make sure that we're working on all fronts and internationally as well to rein in and then eventually defeat this Israeli war machine. So thanks again for everyone and all the fantastic speakers. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the questions as well.
Thank you, Akram, and thank you for all the great work you are doing to communicate the picture of what's going on. Of course, Akram has a long history in also refugee mobilizations and in the mobilizations for Palestinian representation. We work together on many of these campaigns. It's a real joy to host you with us, Akram, and to hear you discussing the prospects also for further mobilization and the challenges confronting us. Now, reflecting on the mobilizations that took place, we have with us today a fantastic Palestinian activist who is also a musician, a contrabassist at the Palestine Youth Orchestra, which is a group that holds performances around the world to highlight the Palestinian music and Palestinian musicians to a global audience. It's Mariam Afifi. Now, Mariam was recently arrested while protesting the ethnic cleansing campaign that is underway in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem. And she, at the time, she was trying to help a young woman that was attacked by IDF soldiers. The videos of her arrest have gone viral, and it's a great honor to be hosting her today. I think all of you will recognize her from her smile while she was being arrested. She stood strong despite all the violence that was unleashed against her. And we're really honored to host you, Mariam. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. So in my presentation now, I will be shedding the light about the situation we have as Palestinians in Jerusalem in order to understand what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah. So basically from the beginning, and I mean by that late 19th century, the Zionist movement's project was to establish a Jewish national home in Palestine, as you all know. And this has to be done through colonization. Understanding this will lead us to understand what's happening in Jerusalem, as to them, it is the capital of this Jewish state. I just want to clarify that saying this doesn't mean opposing the Jewish religion, as many would say it's anti-Semitic, but it's not a religious case. But religion, as always, was used to be as an excuse for colonization, as it will always be the opium of the people. It is important to mention that today Israel is the only state that is based upon religion. If a Muslim goes to Saudi Arabia and to an airport in Saudi Arabia and asks for the Saudi passport, they wouldn't give them one. Like if a Hindu goes to an Indian airport and asks for an Indian passport, they won't give them one. But if a person who's like great grandfather or grandmother goes to an Israeli airport and provides papers for this, he will definitely get the Israeli passport, even if he's coming from like Mars or Jupiter. So basically the Zionist immigration to Palestine started 1882, but the genocides, the ethnic cleansing, the forced displacement of Palestinian people started in 1948, and it's still ongoing until today. Since 1948 until today, it has never stopped. Understanding this will also lead us to understand the ongoing invading and attacks of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and also the invading and attacks in Bab al-Amud, like Bab al-Amud. So because for example, Al-Aqsa Mosque, it is the most remarkable place in Jerusalem. So they wanted to be Jewish, even though the first thing they did when they occupied the eastern part of Jerusalem and the Old City in 1967 is demolishing a huge neighborhood in the Old City called Al-Magharbe, which means Moroccan neighborhood, to create out of it a Jewish place of worship, which they call it the Western Wall today. So from the beginning, the Israeli plan of Jerusalem was the annexation of the land and the displacement of the Palestinian people. And since 1948 and 1967, when they occupied the eastern part of Jerusalem, it hasn't stopped. They want more land and they want less people. The Israeli master plan for Jerusalem is expressed in many master plans, laws, and actions. The first thing they did when they occupied the eastern part of Jerusalem is drawing new lines and borders for what should be considered Jerusalem and what should fall under the Jerusalem municipality. So in drawing these lines, they decided, first of all, not to include too many Palestinian residents in the annexed area, even if historically these areas were considered Jerusalemite, and even if these areas were few kilometers away from the old city, like al-Aizariya. So because al-Aizariya has a huge Palestinian population, they decided to annex the farming land of al-Aizariya and to let out or make them part of the West Bank, the residents of Al-Azariya. The annexation and expansion wall that was constructed 15 years ago was drawn, like the way it was drawn, the way it was constructed is to cut off the West, it was, you know, constructed to cut off the West Bank from the 1948 occupied land. It serves this goal. If you have a look at the root of the wall, the way it is built, you will see how literally their main goal is to include as much land and exclude as much Palestinians. If you go to Ras Al Amoud, which is suburb of Jerusalem, you will see that it's the way it goes. It's like a circle. It's not a line. It's a circle because it goes around a house to exclude this house from its garden. Imagine a house without a garden. So the wall is basically just covering the house, and the garden of the house is excluded from its house. Villages like Al-Walajeh, which is southern of Jerusalem, are surrounded completely by the wall, denying the villagers from any piece of land. And you know, what is a villager without their land? This has affected actually their economic status, as they started selling simple stuff on the streets because they lost their main economic work, which is farming the land. This also affected their status because they now have no access to any urban center. Like I'm talking about the villagers in Al-Walajeh. The second thing they did in 1967, when they occupied the eastern part of Jerusalem, is that they gave the Palestinians in Jerusalem a special legal status, as we are now considered residents and not citizens. And our residency is permanent, which means that every 5 years or less, if we couldn't prove that our life is centered in Jerusalem, that we go to schools in Jerusalem, we work in Jerusalem, we live in Jerusalem, we marry people from Jerusalem, we will lose the status and be displaced out of Jerusalem. Me personally, I know many Palestinians, many Jerusalemites who lost their what we call Jerusalem ID, which is this thing, and that literally has a deadline. If each 5 years I need to renew my ID, and to renew it, I should submit electricity bills, I should submit taxes I pay. So it's really complicated. The third thing they did in 1967 is to apply the Israeli laws in the eastern side of the city, even if, according to international law, eastern side of the city is considered an occupied territory, which means it became easier for the Israeli government to displace Palestinians from Jerusalem legally, like according to their laws. Now the Israeli Ministry of Interior sets its demographic goal for Jerusalem at 70% Israeli. Today, Palestinians are 39, around 40% of the population. This means they want to get the growing number of Palestinians to move out of the city. Maybe you always hear about houses, like you always hear in the news about house demolitions in Jerusalem, but you don't know why. Since 1967 until today, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced by the way of house demolitions, discriminatory policies, and other different ways, like raising the prices and the taxes. They would tax us for literally anything. Like a few years ago, they would tax us for having a television in our house. From the beginning, the occupation implemented colonial policies of displacement, land confiscation, and other ways. What's happening in Sheikh Jarrah today is part of all of this. They want to get us out by any means possible. If their main ways before were through killing and murdering and genocides, today, they use their judiciary system that is inherently colonial. And in doing so, they won't care about international laws that states that people living in Jerusalem and in any occupied territories have protected status, that they should not be transferred out these territories or in these territories. But, you know, as despite all the difficulties we as Palestinians from Jerusalem go through to get us out from here, most Palestinians choose to stay and stand up for our rights, our dignity, and our future. Today, Palestinian refugees and internally displaced people constitute the largest and longest standing unresolved case of refugees and displaced persons in the world. And until today, Palestinians are still forced off their lands, like what we see in Sheikh Jarrah and other places, and contributes to the ever increasing number of refugees. Today, as Palestinians, we are facing a peculiar situation in that we are attacked not only by Israeli forces, police, and soldiers, but also by armed settlers, and not only in Jerusalem or the West Bank or Gaza, but in all the land of historic Palestine. Before, we thought that the settlers roaming the cities, chanting death for Arabs, were doing so independently through WhatsApp messages, through whatever groups, but now we know that the Israeli government and the Israeli forces are using these settlers as one of their ways in oppressing and killing of Palestinians. In Lid, settlers and soldiers were walking together. In Haifa, Jerusalem, and other cities, the police and soldiers were protecting these settlers. Literally every night, I live in the middle of Jerusalem, just close to the old city. Every night, we close the big gate of the whole neighborhood because we are afraid that settlers are going to attack our houses, and they did to many houses. So basically, in order to reshape reality, we need to reshape discourse. One of the things that we need to reshape is for too long now in Jerusalem, they are trying to work with the idea of peace. They are trying to work with school students with the idea of peace. So they would put programs, the Jerusalem municipality, they would put programs for school students to encourage them for peace, for integration, whatsoever. So basically, since the Oslo agreements until today, the word peace has been used a million of times as if the only thing needed is peace to be implemented. But peace isn't the issue, and equality isn't the issue. Freedom is. Freedom is the right and only question. I always, when I speak about peace, especially with school students here in Jerusalem, I always tell them, like, you cannot ask someone who live under discrimination, why don't you make peace with your oppressor who neglects your right as a Palestinian in Jerusalem and in other city, who creates unlivable conditions which are intended to uproot us from our land, while even our basic human rights are violated in a daily basis. Occupation won't stop in Sheikh Jarrah. Even if we win the case and the cause of Sheikh Jarrah, and we will win it, but the occupation will continue. Their bigger plan of a Jewish-Israeli capital for Jerusalem will continue. We saw in the last days how Israeli government is obviously standing at the side of settlers who shout out death to Arabs. That's what they want, death to Arabs. I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about a stand, a position, a representative in the name of Israelis, their country and their government. How can I ever say, let's make peace with that? Israel should be sanctioned. 1 minute, I need to charge my laptop. Okay. Israel should be sanctioned. Free people around the world should push their governments, should go down to the streets and demonstrate. It's not something that Palestinians should only stand for. It's something that all humans should stand for. How can occupation and oppression and colonialism still be ongoing until today? We Palestinians doing a great effort, because not that we are only protesting, getting beaten, arrested, displaced, but also because we are trying hard to educate the world, trying to show the whole world what's going on with us Palestinians. We don't have real representatives here in Palestine. And as I always say, the Israeli media and propaganda is so powerful. We only have our voices to use and our social media platforms. We know that governments would probably never stand in the side of oppressed, but free people around the world will. And don't minimize the power of social media. When I was arrested because I went last week I was arrested, and because I went viral through all social media platforms, it helped to reduce my penalty. They couldn't afford any evidences in front of the brutality that was seen in my arrest. What I want to say, I want to conclude that free Palestine is the question and it is the answer. We resist through everything, through music, through dancing, through art, through literature. Yesterday, when we were in Sheikh Jarrah memorizing the Nakba, they attacked us in Sheikh Jarrah because we were singing. We were literally singing. We were singing for freedom and for our right to be free. They brutally attacked us. Some of us were arrested, and Sheikh Jarrah has been a military zone and has been, actually Sheikh Jarrah has been under siege for 2 weeks now because of our peaceful protests, and because in 2009, they could displace families from Sheikh Jarrah. Actually, I was talking to a Palestinian girl from other city who came from a city that's 3 hours by car away from Jerusalem just to protest in Sheikh Jarrah. I was talking to her and was telling her that I hope what happened in 2009 won't happen today in Sheikh Jarrah, and she didn't know. She didn't know that what happened in 2009. She was like, what happened in 2009? So what's happening now in social media, and we are spreading our word to the world, so everyone now knows what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah. They want to siege our stories and our voices by deleting our posts from social media, but we can raise our voice, we can spread our word through anything. I am a musician in the Palestine Youth Orchestra. We tour the world so our voices can be heard, and to show the world that Palestine still exists. Many thinks that there was no thing as Palestine after 1948. People don't know about us around the world. Every time we tour the world, they are amazed. How would there be Palestine Youth Orchestra? So we should spread our word. We should tell the world that we still exist. Everyone should talk about Palestine. Show the world that it still exists through any way possible. They try to erase us from history. Well, show them that they can't. Most governments might not stand for us, but free people around the world will stand for us. So spread the word, tell the whole world that we still exist through any mean possible, through any way possible. So yes.
Thank you very much, Mariam. And thank you for your courage, for your strength, and for your determination. I love the fact that you not only exhibit the qualities of mobilization, you not only exhibit the qualities of intellectualism. I mean, I was very impressed by your framing of events, and I'm actually inspired by this new generation of mobilizers across Palestine who have a depth of understanding of colonialism that is incredible. And honestly, it is way more advanced than anything we see in these so-called academic circles today, which often speak of what is going on in abstract terms that do not correspond to the experience. Your lived experience, your mobilizing experience, your organizing experience is really helping to shed light on what's going on, but also hopefully to overturning these dynamics.
I was answering what you said is, I just want to mention that in my court, I had, after I was arrested, the judge was surprised and shocked that, well, are you Palestinian and musician? Like, they think that, they don't think that Palestine exists, but they would think as well that Palestinians are nothing, you know? So he was really amazed, like, how come you are Palestinian and you are a musician? So, yeah.
Well, this kind of colonial arrogance is actually part of the weakness of all colonial structures. They end up thinking and underestimating the power of the people, the intellect of the people, and the struggles of the people. And I think we're going to have some reflection on that from Dawood al-Ghoul, who is really one of the most wonderful activists that I know in Jerusalem, in occupied Jerusalem. He is a truly fantastic mobilizer and organizer. And Dawood is somebody who has not only worked to inspire the people in Jerusalem, but also very much is very involved in developing frameworks for understanding what is going on the ground. I always love hearing his analysis, and I'm really looking forward to welcoming him today. So Dawood, please go ahead and share with us what's going on. One thing I want to say before you start is, all my conversations with you and other activists in Jerusalem, I noticed that there's a great congruence between sometimes this feeling in the shatat of helplessness, and that we have to watch this unfolding disaster and these massacres and these horrors. And when I talk to people like you, I'm inspired because you discuss actually a different aspect that, of course, that also accompanies this horror, which is the beautiful energy and force that is emerging out of our people's collective struggle. If you could share with us some of that, that'd be amazing. Thank you. Please go ahead, Dawood.
First, thank you. And I think I will talk about the Palestinian side. I think we had a lot of talks about the Israeli violation and policies and everything. I will try to focus on the Palestinian side and how is the process, how we reached this point, and the massive demonstrations that we have now. I think that we had several changes in different levels, including leadership, community leadership, and also the relation with the, let's call it the classical leadership, or the Palestinian classical leadership with the Palestinian people. After the Second Intifada and the Palestinian division, we started to have a different relation between people and political parties. We started to hear more about people don't trust the Palestinian leadership or the political parties because of the division. And then we had like more NGO working on the community level with like different personal initiatives and local initiatives. But then in Jerusalem, I will focus more on Jerusalem. We this continued until we had the situation as a reflection or reaction of kidnapping and killing the child, Muhammad Abu Khdir. We started having a big demonstrations of Palestinians in Jerusalem, and the Israeli police announcing losing control of the situation. And this was an important moment for the Palestinians, feeling strong and feeling that something can happen. Victory was done for a few days. I heard a lot of people saying that Shafat was liberated, how strong the young people were like confronting the special forces and all the Israeli army and police. And it didn't continue. It was quickly ended because there was no one leadership of all these massive demonstrations started in Shafat or in Jerusalem, but didn't move to the West Bank. We had a similar situation or other things happening in Gaza at the same time, but I will try to focus on Jerusalem, but I think it's a model of similar things happening, especially in the 48 and somehow in the West Bank. Then after 2014, where Israeli police and intelligence started focusing on community leaders. A lot of community leaders in Jerusalem were arrested, deported, or were like jailed or even targeted by different policies, including targeting some of the leaders with like stopping their businesses or putting a high taxes on their businesses, or stopping the family unification cases that they have. It was like a political targeting for the community leaders to stop any opportunity in the future to have these leaders having a very effective positions and making an organization on the ground. During this situation, we started having individual actions. People have energy, have like they are fed of all this situation, but they wanted to do something without to have an umbrella or organization or any even mobilization for what to do. People started to pick what they can do, and they started the individual actions, and we had it like a massive individual actions, like the action that happened today in Sheikh Jarrah with the car, and it continued like that. People reaction was very strong with this individual actions, until in Jerusalem we started to have a different kind of organization. It started also on a social level. When a child is kidnapped, or there is a news about a child that got lost, a lot of young people, even thousands of people in Jerusalem, were gathering to look for the child. It was happened in Beit Hanina, in Jericho, in different places. Even for like 48, there was a big groups of young people going to try to solidarity or help in different cases. It was separated from the classical or leadership or the political parties, but it started to grow as internal solidarity between the Palestinians, and it usually was called Shabab al-Quds or Ulad al-Quds, the sons of Jerusalem or youth of Jerusalem. And then we started to have it strongly represented on the massive demonstrations to remove the metal detected gates in Al-Aqsa Mosque entrances. And then there we started to have more deep the relation between the people, solidarity, and how people are gathering without having the classical political structures represented there. There was a strong representation of the leadership also, with negotiations and meetings to some mobilization, but it was more about young people doing some mobilization and organization in a different new way than the classical way. And it continued. We started to have the social solidarity continuing in different cases, and it was very strong represented on Damascus Gate, how people were like communicating and gathering and in Damascus Gate, and sometimes they were doing this like things through applications or social media, and this is a new tools that was used also in Sheikh Jarrah, and last month it was used effectively to mobilize, gather the people, and quickly people were responding to these new tools and tools of communication and gathering at the same time. Akram mentioned that. How people were gathering in Sheikh Jarrah or in Damascus Gate or in different places. It's amazing, and it makes a very strong feeling of being strong, or sometimes victory. People were expressing about victory or feeling victory because of that. I saw how when the settlers attacked the mosque in Silwan, a big amount of young people were coming from different places. A group of them were coming from Shu'afat refugee camp. The feeling of people automatically was moved or swept from being attacked, and there was a fire and clashes happening at the same time with the Israeli forces, to feeling victory and feeling happy about people coming in solidarity. And it's still what we have now. It's young people taking initiatives and trying to mobilize with a different way of, or let's say it's different than the classical structural political party way, but still what we are missing is the leadership of these young people to reach goals, specific goals, and to build on the success that we have. We have similar situation in the 48, especially it's very clear in al-Fahim before the situation that happened now, that is happening now. And we started to have like a different feeling of the young people or the Palestinians in general, which is having back the hope not to solve the problem of Sheikh Jarrah and this problem of Silwan or the problem of eviction of some houses and families, problem here or there. It's not anymore a problem. It's not anymore a small case. It's a liberation. It's a freedom. It's again feeling united as one people and feeling Palestinians. Even I think when we used to do presentations, usually most of us were showing the map of Palestine, how it was changed before 1947, 1948, 1967, after the Oslo Accord, and then the map of Palestine with the settlements today. I think now it's different. The first thing we will represent, it's the map of Palestine, having everywhere in Palestine reacting and moving with a strong social movement together as one people, which is the strong connection among all the Palestinians, including also the Palestinians in the diaspora. I think it's very important, and it will be a significant added value for the movement now. Any reaction and movement in the by the refugees, Palestinian refugees, anywhere in the world. Because right to return, it's a basic, very important right and the element of the Palestinian case. And I think shortly, this is something that we are proud of. But we think I think we have to build on it in a way that we don't lose the continuity of the movement on the ground. Communication tools is important, but leadership, it's also very important to try to mobilize more and to have some more awareness and education for the new generation involved in this movement. And well, the end, I think it's like feeling victory and feeling back the hope and united. It's very important, but at the same time, there is a big risk that we have. As maybe you heard the news about the settlers shooting 3 Palestinians in Shafat today. What will happen if the Israeli occupation government or authority will announce losing control of settlers in the West Bank or in Jerusalem? We don't have an equal trainings or materials or anything at all to have this like confrontation. And I don't know if you are prepared and ready for that. This is a very long-term scenario, but we have to put it there. Feeling victory now, it's never mean that we win this war and things will not happen in a different way. The Israeli settlers are trained, armed, and they are attacking. They are not doing a protection. They are attacking the Palestinians in different places, and they have a powerful, let's say they have the power because they have the guns also, and they have the protection from the Israeli government, and it's a big risk. I think we have to study that and to be ready for that, not to do similar mistakes to what we had in 1948 with being sure how and what we are spreading through social media, through WhatsApp groups, not to make the people afraid of the situation, and to be ready for being mobilized and moving toward some goals and facing this situation in a very effective way. And I think and I hope this movement will create or will show us some community leaders or even national leaders, and new leaders with a new generation. With even, I don't mind if it's like a new model of political parties or fronts or whatever movements that we have, but it's more important the goal that we are going to reach. And I'm really optimistic about the situation, the movement. I heard a lot about the very hard situation in Gaza and in different places, but I think it's two phases, like it's two different parts of the story. Suffering is one part, but we still under the occupation. This is a normal result of the settler colonial occupation that we have, that it's a very racist colonial occupation. And it's normal for them to do this. We are not expecting justice from the occupation. But at the same time, we have to do a very hard work to face this settler colonial occupation in different levels, the state level, the settlers level, and building our movements, very strong movements with education, mobilization, and awareness. And I hope with plans of and goals where we are, what we are going to reach. I will not repeat other, because we had a lot of speakers from Jerusalem. I wanted just to focus quickly on this process of building the movement on the ground, on the streets, what is happening there. And if you're welcome if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Dawood. And I think it's absolutely essential what you just talked about, because as I mentioned before, there is, despite the overwhelming media coverage that is pro-Israeli in Western circles, there is a small amount of coverage that goes into the humanitarian crisis dimension. But as we know, our people's struggle from the very beginning was a political struggle. It was a national struggle. It's a struggle of a people trying to establish itself, free itself. As Mariam has mentioned, it is a struggle for freedom, which is a much bigger concept than just a struggle for basic rights and so on. What you spoke about today is very important for people to hear about. How are people mobilized? People need to connect with our movements, understand their logics. We need to connect with our activists and hear from them. I know that you and the other organizers in Jerusalem and across Palestine put yourselves at great risk all the time. I know that you were arrested personally, Dawood, and so many others on this panel have suffered arrest and harassment and intimidation on a regular basis. So the least we can do is to center your narratives and talk about what is going on now, especially at this beautiful moment of a great mass mobilization. Now, our next speaker will talk about what's going on in the West Bank. And we know that there is an emerging set of developments happening in the West Bank. We have with us Hafez Omar. And Hafez, of course, is another person who suffered political imprisonment, but he's also an artist and a human rights defender. And he has award-winning artwork that has been widely used in posters, campaigns, defending the right of Palestinian prisoners. And in the BDS movement, also his work was so popular during the Arab Spring, by the way, in places like Egypt and Tunisia and across the Arab world. It was used very widely. He's been very vocal in his opposition of extrajudicial killings in the siege of Gaza. He's been involved in human rights defense work and has been working from his newly opened graphic studio. In fact, he was working in that studio just before his arrest. I'm very pleased to meet him. I'm also very pleased on a lighter note that he's wearing one of the t-shirts he designs. I love that. Hafez, can you show it to people? I love it so much. I'm waiting for mine, by the way. It's so good. So incredible work, Hafez. I love your designs. And I guess it fits in with Mariam's outlook on music. So
yeah,
we want to hear from you about what's going on. What's our people's situation in the West Bank, in the occupied Palestinian territories?
well, first of all, thank you very much for organizing such an event, which is really important, during what's happening now and during what's happening, especially on social media and on news outlets and, mainstream news outlets. These kind of webinars and meetings are really important to deliver the messages of our struggling people on the ground to the rest of the world under the circumstances where, social media are banning our voice, are silencing our voices. Main media outlets are just like, broadcasting the Zionist narrative about what's happening. So
speak louder,
thank you. It's really appreciated. Well, talking about, I really would
louder,
like to.
Hafez. We need to hear you louder. Speaking
Okay,
of and the silence.
All right. Let me just fix the microphone. Is this good? Yeah, can you hear me well? So I really wanted to talk quickly about the West Bank and also about the role of art in this situation and what's going on. First of all, when things started to get harder in Gaza, while, in West Bank, things were kind of silent, but what people didn't actually see or what people couldn't, relate to, that, youth actually moved from West Bank to Jerusalem during the night that preceded the big event in Gaza, to stand in solidarity and to protect Al-Aqsa Mosque and to participate in Jerusalem in protecting Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, which was a development on the course of events that, in West Bank, we live in cities that we don't have the army occupying directly the cities. The army is always on the outskirts of the cities, on checkpoints and military centers. So people couldn't see in the beginning many clashes happening in the West Bank in solidarity with Jerusalem and with Al-Aqsa and Sheikh Jarrah. But in fact, thousands of people have moved, just like the 48ers, Palestinians in 48, who traveled to support Al-Aqsa Mosque. That was the first thing that the youth, the Palestinian youth, young women and men, went to Jerusalem to pray the last Friday in Ramadan, and to stand in solidarity, or not to stand in solidarity, we can't talk, use that phrase for Palestinians, to participate in protecting Al-Aqsa Mosque, to participate in protecting Sheikh Jarrah. And then things started to escalate once, the Zionist assault on Gaza started to cause big numbers of casualties. So people took to the streets in the middle of the night, literally huge demonstrations went in Jenin, in Tulkarem, in Hebron, in Kalkili, in all the Palestinian cities in West Bank. And a result of that, the Israeli army killed more than 12 people until now in demonstrations, wounded many, people. And there is something to focus on, talking about the policies, how the occupation army are dealing with demonstrations like this. If they always avoid killing Palestinians because they believe that every time they kill a Palestinian and there is a martyr and there is a funeral for the martyr, many angry Palestinians will carry on the event and go back and confront the soldiers. So they always try not to go and kill Palestinians, many Palestinians, in these kind of demonstrations. But what we witnessed in the past few days, that they've been killing in a crazy way. They've been shooting people and disabling people in the lower parts that they can't walk anymore. So they've been so vicious against these demonstrations. And we've heard many spokesmen and in the Israeli media that they're warning from an eruption, a bigger eruption of an actual intifada, a bigger scale intifada, as the second intifada that happened between 2000 and 2005 in West Bank to be added to the events that are happening in Gaza and in Jerusalem and in 48. And they were warning that things will go even worse on the Zionist entity if this actually happened. So people in West Bank are, as everyone said and mentioned before, are mobilizing, organizing themselves. And we're talking about youth. We're not talking about the traditional political factions, which are also doing some events and some confrontations and demonstrations. But the very special thing that we're witnessing, we're witnessing the birth of new forces in the Palestinian arena in West Bank. We're talking about youth, young women and men meeting together, communicating, and working together to support the efforts happening in Jerusalem, in Palestine 48, occupied Palestine 48, and in Gaza. So it's really sad to see what's going on in Gaza. It's really sad to see how our people are being treated in the Palestinian occupied villages in 1948. It's really sad to see how people are being shot in West Bank and on the borders from Lebanon and in Jordan. But the very, very beautiful thing that never happened before, and on that scale, that the Palestinians are really united. We're not talking about slogans here. We're not talking about, you know, dreams or imaginary thoughts. We're talking about action. The continuity of the struggle now is not just something we talk about in theory. It's happening in places where we surprise, as what our colleague just said, that she never imagined that this would happen in 48. The Palestinian flag is being raised everywhere, on every Palestinian occupied city. 48, West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem, in the refugee camps all over the surrounding countries of Palestine. So this is the bright side about what's happening now, despite all the pain, despite all the crimes that has been, you know, done to our people, especially in Gaza. But the thing that is really, we're really looking forward to build on in the future, because things will not end in this battle. And we still have a lot of work to do in the future. But what we know for sure, that we have a great starting point to build on. Many, many sectors of our people are now united behind our rights, our basic rights to return to self-determination and to liberate our land. And we're just like burning many, many years where many, let's say, entities and bodies forced policies to make us forget who we are, to lose our identity, especially in 48. And we as Palestinian, even as Palestinian activists, we always thought that it's really hard to move that really important sector of our people. And to be honest with you, we were speechless and we were just like mesmerized in front of TVs at the beginning, looking at what's happening in 48 and in Jerusalem and everywhere. We're talking about civilians without any forces, without any weapons, without any kind of, they're just protesting. They're protesting their rights under one flag, the Palestinian flag, which was always banned to be held inside Palestine 48. Now this is our address, this is our political speech, and we should always remember, before what happened, we were talking about Palestinian elections for the PLC, the Palestinian Legislative Council, for, you know, it's a parliament for the Palestinian Authority. But what we're seeing today is something really bigger than the PLC or the National Authority. We're talking about our people everywhere, where the PLO mandate is covering all these people. It's a direct call that we need to renew our representation in our national institute, because these efforts, these martyrs, these bloods, all these sacrifices needs a leadership that represents everybody and lead their ongoing effort to achieve their goal. We need to lift the siege that's happening on Gaza since more than 15 years. We need to have the freedom to live and to move in West Bank and in Jerusalem. We need our people in 1948 to be represented in our national institute, and this is really important to the ongoing struggle. And without that, we cannot really. Our path will be longer to achieve our goals. So this is one part that I wanted to talk about quickly. I want to move quickly to talk about social media and art role in the battle that's happening. One of the things that was really promising and really beautiful for me as an artist who has been always accompanying events with, you know, designing posters and doing some artistic supporting events online, that during this assault on Gaza and Jerusalem, tens of Palestinian young artists, graphic designers, painters, cartoonists, musicians, dancers have been producing artworks supporting our people, talking to the international community, not the international community, the popular international community, not the, you know, mainstream colonial community. We're talking about people standing in solidarity with Palestine from South Asia till Latin America and North America and everywhere. And many people have been producing important artworks that people have been using to express their solidarity with Palestine and to explain what's actually happening. It's really painful that we've been going through this, and I'm talking especially about Gaza. That's the fourth war that's being waged on Gaza, and we have to start from the very beginning every time to talk about whose mistake is that, who started that, and how these things started. And basically why? Because now it's happening. The mainstream media outlets are like spreading the Zionist propaganda about what's happening, silencing every Palestinian voice, trying to give the truth about what's happening, and portraying what's happening as a conflict between two struggling powers, and making Hamas and Palestinian factions holding the responsibility on what's happening, neglecting how things erupted from the very beginning till today. That's one side. The other side, the main, like the social media outlets such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, have been working on banning many Palestinian activities and activities in solidarities with Palestinians. They've been deleting the hashtags, they've been deleting the images, and it's really weird. Like, whenever you post a picture of people like resisting, you know, either by you know, shooting rockets or shooting Molotov cocktails or any form of resistance, they're less monitoring this or banning this. But whenever you show the pictures of the victims of the Israeli bombardment on Gaza, they delete it immediately. There is a kind of, it's not only an algorithm process that, as they claim, has been deleting the many Palestinian posts over social media. I've been monitoring what's happening, and it's a policy just to show the Palestinians are, you know, responsible for what's happening. So this is one front that we actually need help on. We've been trying to have our voices heard over social media, but until now we're not being able to figure it out. Some youth activists here and journalists have met with Facebook administration who visited Palestine and explained to Facebook what are they actually doing, but nothing came out of these meetings. They're still following the occupation policies on silencing the Palestinian voices. Either it's coming from Palestine or it's coming from abroad in solidarity with Palestine. So in general, that's what's happening. West Bank is standing united with alongside all the Palestinians fighting for their rights under one flag, the Palestinian flag, Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem, 48. And yeah, we're facing, beside what our people are facing everywhere, we're also facing like many efforts to silence our voices and we need to do something, to think collectively of something to solve this. And the final point that I want to highlight again is restoring our national institute and having a true representation for all our forces on the ground: West Bank, Jerusalem, Palestine 48, Gaza, and in the diaspora, to represent our ambitions and our efforts in achieving our rights. And we're so thankful, and something really important for people who are abroad and standing in solidarity with Palestine, with Gaza. On behalf of everybody, thank you, really, really thank you. We so much appreciated. It's despite all what we're going through, we really get strength from you standing with us, because we know that we're not only standing for Palestine, we're not only standing for Palestinian cause, we're standing for all the oppressed against all the colonizers, all the oppressors. So we are united in this, not only the Palestinian people, every free human being on this earth standing today with Palestine is part of liberating not only the Palestinian, but liberating all the global colonized South from oppression. And thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hafez. Your words were so powerful on so many counts. I know that you spoke about some of the oppression that's going on. And actually, I couldn't help when you mentioned their policy of maiming people, but to think of your brother, who was shot in the eye after spending nearly a decade in prison. Right after going out of prison, he goes out into a demonstration. They shoot him in the eye. He loses.
That was in the last war in Gaza in 2014, when we participated on a demonstration against what was happening in Gaza. They shot him directly in the eye. So he's now with one eye, and he's still demonstrating in Spain in solidarity with Palestine. So even if they shoot us on the legs, on the eyes, and maiming us, nothing will stop us from walking towards Palestine, no matter where we are, no matter what circumstances we're going through.
I must say, Hafez, one of the most moving things that I've read in 2014, in the post-2014 period, was the letter he wrote to the young child in Gaza who got shot in the eye as well, at the time, which was talking about precisely this commonality of experience, and which was giving strength and support to this young child.
One of the weird things that happened to me while I was in prison in the interrogation was the interrogator was trying to explain to me that it was a coincidence and it wasn't meant to shoot my brother in his eye. But I mentioned 4 people who got shot in their eyes to tell them that this is your policy. This is not a coincidence. This is something you do. And we've witnessed it in Al-Aqsa Mosque a few weeks ago. We witnessed it in Palestine 48. This is the way that they're dealing with us, subhumans. It's okay to shoot them in the legs that they wouldn't walk again, or in the eyes. Some people were shot in both of their eyes and lost sight in the same day. So this is something that they're doing, but this will not ever prevent us from seeing Palestine, dreaming for a liberated Palestine, liberated Palestinian people.
Thank you, Hafez, for your inspiring words and for your focus on mobilization and on Palestinian representation as the key to overcoming the reality. Because what our people are doing now is they are putting energies, they are putting massive sacrifices, and these sacrifices have to be translated into a political project for liberation. And this is the only way forward. We have in our long history many examples of how that project for liberation could be coordinated, organized, highlighted. And I think that this moment is a very special moment that might actually be sowing the seeds for this future renaissance for the Palestinian people. On this note, we're going to end with Professor Ussama Makdisi, who's going to talk about the US angle. We are a united people in the Shatat, in Palestine, in the refugee camps, and even at the center of the empire, the United States, where Professor Makdisi and even myself are based. Professor Makdisi has dedicated his academic career to talking about the region, talking about the Arab world, talking about Palestine, highlighting the histories of this important part of the world. He is a professor of history and the first holder of the Arab American Educational Foundation Chair of Arab Studies at Rice University. His most recent book is a remarkable book, really, that we've organized an event on recently, Age of Coexistence. The Age of Coexistence, the Ecumenical Frame and the Making of the Modern Arab World, which was published in 2019 by the University of California Press. I really recommend that you read it. Professor Makdisi has written several books before exploring, one of the dimensions he explores is the U.S.-Arab relations dimension and U.S. policy towards the Arab world and towards Palestine specifically. I'm thinking here of works like Faith Misplaced, for example, which explored the history of that relationship. He's reflected a lot on U.S. policy, and we look forward to hearing from him. Please go ahead, Professor Makdisi.
Thank you so much, Abed, and thank you to Fadi and Professor Takriti, Fadi, and of course to my fellow panelists, and especially to all my people in Palestine. Honestly, it's to listen to what each and every one of these panelists has said, and the way they have brought to life and brought to our our consciousness this idea of defying not only Israeli brutality and racism and apartheid and oppression and colonialism, but also the stereotypes that we are subjected to, the stereotypes that Arab women are mute and the stereotypes that Arab men are terrorists, and these kinds of stereotypes and go hand in hand with the brutalization. So I would like to start by something that Aya said at the beginning. I know she's no longer with us here now, but she said that we're not voiceless. Palestinians are not voiceless, but they're devoiced. And I think the reason, of course, she's absolutely right. Clearly, given this panel and given the extraordinary testimonies of and statements and explanations of each of the panelists in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, outside, in exile, it's clear that the Palestinians are not voiceless. It's clear that Israeli colonialism has worked by essentially, as we know and as all of you know, especially those of you in Palestine, through brute force, through violence, through extraordinary racism, through systems of oppression and so on. You all know this, of course, but also, as you all also know, and as we know outside, through a narrative, through a myth, through a way of framing the entire story, to the point where everything, almost everything is reversed. The reality is turned upside down. So the oppressed are the oppressors. The oppressors are the oppressed. Palestine does not belong to its actual natives. It belongs to the colonizers, and so on and so forth. You know all this history, and we know this history. And what's amazing and what I see today for the first time is not just that this narrative, this way of framing the conflict, which has been so important to how Zionism has been able to perpetuate its domination of Palestine. For the first time in my experience, it's beginning to break at least in the West to an extent. Obviously, this doesn't mean that there will be liberation tomorrow, but it's very clear to me that the images that you are and your activism, your spirit, your presence, your resistance on the ground in Palestine to lynching, to the mobs, these horrendous mobs that scream and chant death to Arabs, the racism, the oppression, the segregation, the apartheid, the bombings, the killings, all these things that take place clearly take place as long as people outside, especially in America, which funds Israel, are not able or willing to see those things for what they are. In other words, overt and astonishing racism, an anachronism. Somebody, I think it's Hafez, or I can't remember who said it earlier, somebody described the anachronism, because this is an anachronism. Lynching is an anachronism. The mobs chanting death to Arabs is an anachronism. This kind of colonialism, the settler colonialism, is an anachronism. These are things that are not meant to happen in the 21st century. And the fact that we have so many people like Hafez, Akram, Mariam, Muna, and everyone else, Aya, who spoke out earlier, all these people who are revealing this history tells us that the narrative is beginning to change. And what's most important for me is not to tell you what you already know. It's not to say that people have not been willing to have that we have been voiceless, but it's that in the West, there's been an unwillingness to hear what Palestinians have been saying. But for the first time, I really do believe that something is changing. Now, what that means in historical terms, as Abid said, every decolonization doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen even in a generation. It doesn't necessarily happen in a century, but there are pivotal moments in every anti-colonial struggle. And it's clear to me that what's happening today, because of you in Gaza, in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, in Palestine, there is a pivot. Something has changed. For the first time ever, the Zionists are on the defensive in terms of the propaganda war. That is clear. And I understand it doesn't change the military and political balance of or imbalance of power and the oppression that you face, and that we all face in different ways, but that you face most directly and most extremely. But there is no question that there's a pivot occurring. People understand. People understand. Lebanese understand. Egyptians understand. Jordanians understand. All the Arabs, Syrians understand. Every Arab understands, and not just Arabs, of course, people around the world understand what is happening in increasing numbers in Palestine. And Zionism will not be able to continue its oppression of the Palestinians without a domination of the narrative. And insofar as the narrative is changing, I think for the first time, there is genuine hope because of the actions of people on the ground. And I really do believe for the first time that we're now, we've had a pivot, things are changing, and things are changing in a positive direction, despite the fact of the extreme brutality and brutalization and dehumanization of the Palestinians, because they have not accepted that. So the point is not to look to the United States government to change right now, because it won't change. All they will do is repeat the same lies, the same propaganda, the same dehumanization, the same rhetoric, the same talking points of AIPAC. But people in America understand that lynching is wrong. They understand that mobs are wrong. They understand that Palestinians increasingly understand that Palestinians are oppressed. And that gives hope, because if people here can understand, then there is a future of liberation that is not hopefully too distant in the future. But the point is, you're not forgotten. And I really do believe that the most beautiful aspect of the Palestinian story is its simplicity. We're here, we exist, we have rights, we're not going away, we want freedom, we want liberation. It doesn't take prevarication, it doesn't take ideology, it doesn't take anything beyond the most basic human facts. And I think, honestly, this is why things are pivoting towards liberation. And so all I can tell you and wish you is my absolute and total love for all of you and each of you in this moment, in this very dark moment. But I think we are on the way towards liberation. And thanks most of all to each of you. Thank you. And thank you, Abid, honestly, for organizing this, because it's been a true inspiration for me and for, I'm sure, everyone who's been listening to this. Everyone who has a heart and who has eyes to see will feel genuinely uplifted by the voices we've heard today. So thank you to each and every one of you. And thank you, Abid, for putting us all together, and Fadi for bringing us all together, all of us who care so deeply about this, this beautiful place. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure, Ussama. And honestly, I always say this, we need to break the siege on our people's voices. We need to be able to present to the world voices from the ground. The journalists are not doing this job. They should be interviewing the people on this panel. Maybe now that Israel has bombed the hell out of all the journalists in Gaza, maybe after they decided to destroy the AP headquarters and the headquarters of Jazeera and other organizations, perhaps there might be a change, although I doubt it. I think the editors will still resist what's going on. I think this both sidism will continue. However, we have luckily alternative ways of communicating the voices of our people. I think universities should play a much bigger role in this. And this is why it was very important for us at the Center for Arab Studies to organize this, because universities have a responsibility when the media is so silent. We claim to be studying this region, this part of the world, and this is the most central issue in that part of the world, and it is being completely erased. So universities, academic centers have an essential role to play in this, and in centering the people's voices, in refusing this both sidism, and talking actually in very rigorous terms, like our speakers spoke today, is very powerful. What is being presented today is very important for scholars and students to hear. And now, speaking of that, we have many scholars, we have many students, we have also many people from the general public in the audience today. So let's move on to the Q&A. We have Fadi Qafaiti with us, will be managing this part of the teaching. By the way, I know that you've been here for a long time, but teach-ins take a long time precisely because they're meant to immerse people in what's going on. So Fadi is the Assistant Director of the Center for Arab Studies at the University of Houston, the Arab American Education Foundation Center for Arab Studies at the University of Houston. Fadi, please, we're going to move on to you so that you can manage the discussion. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdel Razzaq, for this. Thank you for our incredible panelists and speakers today. This was truly inspiring and will remember for the rest of my life. My heart goes out especially to Aya and Hamdi, who are with us today from Gaza, as well as everyone today in Gaza who took the time to speak to us under aerial bombardment and under electricity cutoffs. So this is truly fascinating. The fact that we lost Aya, I just wish her well, and I hope she's doing all right. A note, special thank you as well to all of our guests, my friends, family, people in the audience, our attendees. In less than 48 hours, we amassed the largest turnout we've ever had in the center. So it is truly phenomenal for that. We have more comments and questions, but we've received a lot of solidarity from across the globe, from the United States, from Hawaii, from the United Kingdom, from Haiti, Saudi Arabia, Philippines, Jordan, Lebanon, and the list goes on, Barcelona, on Twitter, Mexico, you name it. So thank you very much. And I just wanted to share this to the panelists. So far, they have been very broad questions. You're more than welcome to write, and as well in Toronto and Canada, we're seeing in the chat. We have broad questions, so whoever would like to answer this from the panel. The first is from Jennifer Bailey. Jennifer Bailey asks, the green light from the US is Israeli propaganda. President Biden contacted President Abbas yesterday. Can you receive news from your own government? I'm from the US who works to end the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. I write to anti-Palestinian congressional members and we know we care and support you. The next question is from Hamad Hamad. 48ers are also used as political pawns to paint this idea of coexistence and equal rights to the West. What's happening right now to debunk these myths?
President Biden clearly, obviously, gave the green light to Israel to continue the bombardment. And from what I understand, Hadi Ahmed is going to Palestine. Basically, it was a message to tell the Israelis, if this is to be confirmed, and I guess we're going to find out soon enough, that they can continue to bomb Gaza and that they have essentially a green light to continue to bomb. But the idea is eventually to figure out what can they do to in other words, there's no hope coming from the US administration as far as I can see. It's absolutely no hope. The only hope is the continuation of what we're doing and what you're doing, what everyone is doing, to continue insisting that the Palestinians are not going anywhere. They continue to resist, and to change the narrative, which, as I said, outside is changing slowly. But it's changing, there's no question.
In the 48, we have different political parties. The master presented, it's the one that joined the Knesset. But still we have different other political parties that they are not joining the elections for the Knesset. And they are also calling for boycott the Knesset. It's a diversity and different ways and tools and visions for getting better situation. It's like 1948 land and people has a very special situation where they also have a life that they are demanding and working and struggling for making this life better in different levels. And you can call it coexistence, you can call it struggling for better life, you can call it whatever you want, but the racism, the reality of the settler colonial occupation deal with the Palestinians in the 48 as a demographical bomb, which means that all the time planning policies, including the last national recognizing Israel as a nation state for only Jews. It's a racism, it's a very direct racism, including marginalization. And I think it's also related to the situation happening now. The law considering Israel as a Jewish state, it's including or hiding the thoughts or the plans to displace land. There were some scholars or were saying that the recognizing Israel as a Jewish state, it include also plans to first transfer the Palestinians also from the occupied lands in 1948. And it's a reality of the settler colonial occupation. It's not a normal state. It's not the only democratic state in the Middle East. It's a settler colonial occupation that until now making plans, the national Israeli plans, it's based on an empty land. The plans, it's not even considering that there are Palestinians in the 48. Until now, several towns or villages for the Palestinians in the 48 has no transportation. If you want to go to some of these like towns or villages or sometimes cities, you just use the public transportation to the next settlement there. This is a reality. In Haifa, the city that considered the city of coexistence, the Israeli authorities there and municipality are planning to demolish Al-Mahatta neighborhood. And there is a whole cases of demolishing houses in Halisa neighborhood, where the Israelis are really afraid to enter this neighborhood. And there are several similar cases to what is happening in Area C and in Jerusalem, in Haifa, but still it's considered coexistence. It's hiding the reality and trying to show a different face of democracy, but I think it's fake. And the reality, it's the reaction of the Palestinians in the 48. The actions that are happening in the 48 nowadays, it's not started last week. It started longer time ago with demonstration against violence and different other topics. But in reality, it's highlighting the occupation. Always they were raising the Palestinian flag and saying different things related not only to the topic, direct topic of the demonstration, but always about the political case in different places. There is a lot of things to talk about it, but it's like the same in a different way because of the speciality of different places in Palestine.
So basically one of the tactics that Israel used against the 1948ers are spreading violence and spreading, most importantly, drugs among the Palestinians in these lands. So basically, spreading the drugs would only weaken. They thought that it will only weaken the 1948ers. But yeah, now what we're seeing now has proven that wrong. But yeah, drugs was one of the tactics that was used by Israel against 1948ers, especially in Lid, in the city of Lid.
So the last two questions are coming from Ahmad Hdeib and Mahmoud Shredi. Ahmad asks, how can we get out of our bubble to share our struggle with others, specifically with the Zionist media and mainstream media siege against our pain and activism? And Mahmoud asks, how can we fight against fragmentation, specifically in regards to the refugees in exile? Could you speak on the right of return? And thank you so much to all of our speakers for your time and labor.
Thank you very much. Please, let's do some concluding remarks and try to address these questions in the concluding remarks. Well, let's start with Hamdi from Gaza. Hamdi, thank you for staying with us. I know it's very dark and late and electricity is low.
Well, thank you so much. Indeed, I ran out of electricity as of now with very poor lightning. I am really impressed by this event with the panelists, with the audience, those who stayed with us. More than 100 people stayed with us just to hear our perspectives on what's going on. In general, I'm amazed with the development, and I am optimistic. I have a great hope that we have great potential to move on. The level of solidarity around the world is very great. A message for our Palestinians on the internal dynamics over the course of the last 15 years or so, the internal split has always played a very negative image about all of us, which has weakened the international solidarity. It's a message for our leaders in Palestine, just to identify really and to move on from partisanship to identify the real enemy. It's not about election. It's not about internal, let's say, split between Hamas and Fatah, but rather it's about land. The basic issue remains the same. It's about our land, our existence. The challenge is how to move forward, how to unify ourselves, and how to create and expand this solidarity with Palestine in the States and Europe, and not to mention the Arab world, which I'm sorry to say that it's below expectations. The level of solidarity in the Middle East and in the Arab world is below. We all understand the oppressive regimes. Most of the time, even people are not free to act, but when they are free, they act in a very positive way in support of Palestine. This is what can I say? Thank you so much for inviting me, and all wishes to you all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hamdi. Now we move on to hear from Muna.
I just want to say thank you all, of course, for organizing this. And I just wanted to really emphasize the point that the Palestinian history of resistance has so many valuable lessons to teach us about how to do this unifying, like decolonial resistance together. So I think this is really a great moment in time where we can also gather our forces and look at our history of successful solidarity and unity type of resistance between all fragmentation of Palestinian society, whether within historic Palestine and beyond, and to really build on that for like meaningful decolonial resistance. So this is my message to all of you, and thank you all and the great audience as well for all your great comments and questions.
Ussama.
Yes, again, thank you to everybody, to the panelists and to the audience. The truth is that we're not in a bubble. The bubble has been burst. The people around the world can see what's happening. Every single day, people see it more and more clearly. And that's down ultimately to the fact that the Palestinians inside have not given up, have not surrendered, have nowhere to go. And will not go. And so I think that's the most, there's no bubble left. The only bubble is the Zionist bubble and the sort of the propaganda around that. And I think that's been burst. So more power to all of you, each of you, truly humbled and honored. And I wish you the very best.
And Mariam, last word to you.
I just want to emphasize that freedom is always the question, and it is as well the answer. Our voices are our only weapons. So spread the word, talk about Palestine, talk about Palestinians, And you know, at the end, it's our cause is a humanitarian cause. It's a cause for humanity. All humans around the world, they went through colonization and they know the pain and the feeling of being colonized. So spread the word to all humans. They will understand, and don't believe any stereotypes about Palestinian women or Arab women especially. We are educated, we have voices, and we want our voices to be heard by the rest of the world and not to be silent.
Well, I think we will never be silenced so long as we have courageous people like you, inspiring people like you, Mariam, and like our other panelists. Our solidarity and love and strength is derived from this commitment to freedom. And I think that it's a principle that unites people across the world. I've seen in the chat room so many comments coming from Afro-British brothers and sisters, coming from people from across the Afro-Asian world, from also Canada and the US and many other parts of the world. I think people are thinking about Palestine, and people want to hear more and more about what's going on the ground. It was an honor for us to host the people who are involved in the popular mobilizations taking place. What is going on is not just a situation of Israeli military incursions, colonialism, and apartheid. What is going on is also something really beautiful, which is a struggle of a people to gain its freedom. And there's nothing more beautiful than a people struggling for freedom. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you all for staying this long and for staying up this night in Palestine so late. But we really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you, everyone. And thanks to our attendees and co-sponsors and everybody else. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Living in Palestine.